Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Maybe you have to have a fully open Serpent Gate bowling pin hat in order to get shoulder rivers.
Ah.
Welcome back, folks. It is episode 13 of Brothers of the Serpent. Your favorite serpentine siblings here to talk about pyramids, gods, devils, Nephis, Anunnaki, Enki, fucking little giants, aliens, pyramids, huge rocks, floods, glaciers, pyramids, dreams, spirits, angels, demons, pyramids, and of course, snakes.
Snakes. Pyramids.
Pyramids. All right.
So what's on your mind today, man?
Well, I've been thinking about this this idea of transcendental numbers or like non-real numbers and how they fit in with okay. Pi is a irrational number, right? You get 3.14159 and it goes on and on forever and there's no pattern or repeating. That makes it irrational. You can never actually fully express it because it goes on forever. So it's a non-rational, non-real number, okay? And yet it defines the relationship between the radius of a circle and its circumference. So if you confine the circumference of the circle to 10, then the radius of the circle will be irrational. It will be an irrational number because you have to multiply the circumference by pi to get the radius. So no matter what, that relationship will always have a non-real component to it. Something that cannot be expressed in this material universe. Can't be. This is part of what makes like the error thing interesting. Like, you know, when we look out and we see like, okay, so we understand that there's this very simple mathematical formula to tell us how far away planets will be in each orbit. Like our solar system fits this. Like the next planet will be so far out, and then the next one is so far out, and its mass and everything is defined in this. Okay, but they don't ever quite. They're not quite exactly right, right? Like you look at Jupiter and you're like, it's almost right, but it's not quite, and that's because the math as an abstract can use things like non-real numbers and so on, but Jupiter has to be built of real things, of little blocks and pieces of stuff. Those things can't be subdivided into some non-real freaking endlessly going on piece division like pi. So you can't ever actually have a circle that has a radius that is like this non-real number, because you can't like, it's sort of like, the average family has one, like 2.5 kids. No one has 0.5 kids. That's not, kids come in chunks like what's his name was like Feynman was saying, right? They come in lumps, right? Children come in lumps. So you can have 3 kids or you can have 2. Now the average will be a non-real kid number.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that the same thing is happening with everything in the universe. There is like, I started to see this non-real number. I don't know why this happened, but I started to see this number as extruding off into the realm of the abstract of the spirit, you could say. Okay, so like all these shapes are defined by these ratios, which have like non-real components, and that is you could take that line, and that's the one that goes off into the spirit realm, the abstract realm from which all of this stuff come from, the ideas for it, right? I mean, like, why is it that we look out into the universe and we see mathematical structure on stuff, the Platonic solids, like we see these things and they seem to be ubiquitous across the universe. Like phi is the same way. Mm-hmm. It governs, it's a ratio that governs, but it's non-real. Phi is like we use a symbol to define it because you can't write it out because it goes on forever, right? And yet it defines all these real things.
1.618 something.
Right, something forever.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just like the other day and this isn't really fully fleshed out, but it's like I suddenly had this idea that is what tells us that we are in fact like connected to and like governed by a completely different realm than this physical one that we're in.
A non-real realm.
Yes, the spirit one. Like these,
That's
these
an interesting way to
right?
look at
These
it,
numbers are non-real, cannot be expressed in lumps of the things that we have here, and yet they define the shapes of these things everywhere. And so that shows you that these shapes all have this sort of non-real component that extends off into some other realm that isn't part of this one. I mean, am I way off here? What do you think?
No, I'm really trying to grasp what you're saying, and
I don't grasp it either. Like, think of it as like
trying to grok this.
yeah, like I started to see it as like you have this shape and it's got all these like, okay, so blueprints, right? I've got blueprints on the table. And the blueprints show this design for a house, and it has all these mathematical concepts in it, okay? But there are certain concepts that are being used in the design that cannot be expressed in terms of pieces of wood and bricks or whatever you're going to use for the house. Those concepts actually extrude off the blueprint paper and into the realm of the abstract of the mind of the person who designed the house.
Okay, I gotcha.
Okay, they will never be expressed in the house except for as a ratio. They won't ever be totally like perfectly expressed. You can't do it because
Right.
you have to use lumps in the house. You have to use bricks or boards or whatever, right? You can't have a board that is measured at 3.14159.67.
Right.
Like,
Like anytime you grab a compass and you draw a circle.
right, there is a non-real component to that circle.
Right,
that
even-
cannot be defined by bits. Yeah,
If you were to really measure the circle, you'd find out it was in bits and chunks too.
Right,
Because it
exactly.
was made by the ink of the pen or the lead or whatever.
right. Yes,
Or the pixels on a screen. It's never actually a circle.
right. The circle is
Is a concept
the perfect
that's
circle
non-real.
Yeah, the perfect circle is an abstract idea. Yeah, which never exists here, right?
Right.
And so, this makes me think of this. There's kind of like this ancient, I don't know what you would call it, tradition in some cultures, lots of cultures really, but especially in the Middle East, where the great artisans, as they were doing a sculpture or doing a painting, would purposefully put an error in there somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so the error.
To show that they were human.
Yeah, no. I used to, that is the explanation, like, to show that they are not as good as God, because God can create everything perfectly and they cannot because
But
they're
he
human.
didn't.
Yeah. They're putting that in there to recognize the fact that God was trying to build the universe out of lumps and using like these abstract, perfect mathematical concepts, but you can't translate those into like lumps or fractions of lumps. And so there are errors in how far away things are from themselves, or what the orbits of certain things are, what the time is of some stuff. Like,
Right.
we don't have 360-day year. We have 365.2424, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like this acknowledgement of the imperfection of the real, despite the fact that it was, at least in these people's minds, designed and built by some divine, omnipotent being. He was limited by the fact that he's building this universe out of chunks of stuff. So that the blueprints are perfect, and you can see them by you look out there in the universe and you see the plan. It's clear, and it's very simple and uses very simple mathematical concepts that are just like beautifully abstract. But
as you zoom into the pixels.
yeah, you're like, ooh, yeah, that
not really a good curve.
Didn't quite work there. And yet there's things like fractals, like, or the what is it called? The scale invariability, the geological thing.
Scale and invariance.
Yeah, scale invariance, which is a fractal idea, where it's just like no matter how close or how far away you get, it's the same complexity appearance.
Right.
Right. So that's why in pictures of geological stuff, you have to have some kind of relative size thing, because I could take a picture of a piece of gravel and you're looking at it and you're like, is this a gigantic boulder or is it a little tiny rock? Because there would be no apparent difference, because the gigantic boulder would pretty much look the same. So how do you get that with like imperfections? How do you get scale invariance? How do you get fractals? Because a fractal in and of itself is an abstract idea.
What is that idea?
Like, have you ever seen the fractal things on, like, they put them on YouTube where you see this weird pattern and they start zooming into it. And then as the pattern gets closer to you, you can discern more pattern on the edges of what you thought. And it just never gets less or more complex, no matter how far you zoom out or zoom in.
Is it the same pattern repeating? Because that's got a name too.
It's okay. you can tell that the pattern is governed by some complex mathematical formula, but I wouldn't say it's the same.
Okay, so I'm thinking of something. I got to look this up now.
But you can look up any fractal, zoom in fractal or whatever, and you'll see like there'll be this appearance of an edge, and as you get closer to the edge, you realize that it also has complexities. And eventually you'll zoom in far enough to where one of those little tiny complexities that were along this big edge you were looking at has the same shape as the big edge you were looking at, but it's much smaller. And then as you keep zooming in, that one begins to show complexities as well. And so that it's scale invariance. It does not, no matter how far you zoom in or zoom out, the complexity remains the same, the apparent complexity.
Yeah, okay, so that's not quite. There's this other type of thing, and I can't remember what. There's a specific name for it, and it's a strange name.
Okay.
But it's when you're looking at, like when you zoom out, right? You'll see that it's got this pattern.
Okay.
And then as you zoom in to, like, let's say the pattern comes to a point somewhere.
All right.
And as you zoom in on that point, the closer you get to the point, you realize that you're now going back to like what the bigger pattern was as you're zooming in on that point. And that big, so it's the same, but it repeats in size.
Yes.
Instead of across.
That might be, you could probably do that with fractals.
Yeah, it's, God, I can't remember what the name of it is. It's really interesting. Aunt Kathleen was talking about it.
Oh, okay.
And I looked up whatever the name of it was, because I'd never heard of it. And there's a bunch of them. People use the computers to generate them. And it's like, it's crazy. Dude. Yeah.
Like, wow, this is cool. Whoa.
Yeah, it's the same thing I was just looking at when I was zoomed way out.
Right. Okay, so yes, that's fractal. That happens in fractal zooming. You'll see this big edge, and you'll start zooming in on it, and then you'll realize that it has all these things on it. Yeah. And then as you keep zooming in, you'll eventually realize that there's this edge is going to be the same edge. Yeah. Now you're way inside the structure you were looking at initially, and you're like, wait, how's that the same? That's a fractal. That's scale invariance. It's just a way to show scale invariance using computer modeling.
Yeah.
Right. So the same reason why like a tiny little creek that's cut its way through, through the sediment or whatever will look the same basically as a humongous gorge that's been cut through like all kinds of bedrock, or like little tiny ripples from like an inch of water running across the beach look exactly the same as like humongous ripples from like, 1,000-foot tidal wave going across like plains. If your relative distance is the same. If you got two photos of these things side by side, you can't tell which one is what unless there's something else in there, like a car.
It gives you a relative
size. You can like, okay, this one's small because I see somebody's hand. That one's gigantic because there's like an 18-wheeler down there, or whatever. So that scale invariance is part of this weird property of the universe that sort of shows you that everything, no matter how big or small, is governed by the same set of basic fundamental mathematical principles, geometric ones, right?
Yeah.
That's why that happens. So it's like, no matter how big or small you get the same patterns from the same forces.
But then once you get small enough, like you get into the quantum level, everything starts acting differently and obeys
right, because the universe is made of lumps, right? That's what Feynman would say. Like because we are actually not an abstract thing like a fractal is on a computer, where it can just zoom in forever and continue to show you the different patterns and stuff. The universe actually has to be made of stuff. And so at some point you've zoomed all the way in and now you start to see the pixels, which won't ever happen on a fractal model.
Right, but they obey different, they seem to obey a different set of rules.
Yeah. But the rules are
at least
all very vague. And
they seem to obey a different set of rules, but we don't really know. I mean, like that's what they think, based on what they've observed. They're like,
well, okay, so this is I'm kind of getting at that, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which basically says that like the more accurately you define one property of a subatomic particle, the less accurately you can define the other property, right? So if it's got velocity and it's got location, if I very precisely give you its location, then I will not be able to give you its velocity at all.
Right.
If I just kind of give you a fudge on it's kind of around here, then I can say it's kind of going this fast. Right. That's the uncertainty. Like
you can never know one or the other.
Right.
You can't, if you know one, you can't know the other.
Right. Well, and so the uncertainty has to equal 1, right? So I can give you, if I try to divide the uncertainty between each one, 0.5 on each property, then I'm just going to give you fudged versions of it. Yeah. But this is what I'm saying. That uncertainty maintains this weird like extrusion off into this realm of the abstract, the spirit, whatever it is, right? That very uncertainty, like the fact that like the more closely I define one property, the farther out of reach the other one gets. It goes off into some realm where I can't get to it.
It's the same relationship between pi and or the circumference and the
right.
Sorry.
Yes, exactly.
Pi and the radius or whatever it is.
Yeah, the circumference and the radius, like pi is the relationship there.
Right. So the closer you define pi, no wait.
Well, the closer, the more
the
precisely
closer you define the circumference, the less you can define the radius.
Right. In real terms, yes.
In real terms,
exactly.
yeah.
So if I tell you it's like, well, it's kind of roughly like 10, but I'm giving you a rough number, like there's no accuracy here. It's not 10.0000 or whatever. I'm just saying it's kind of like 10. Then I can give you the radius. As whatever number I would get, and it can be like, well, it's kind of like around 3, 3.2, whatever. But if I say it's 10.00000000, say like it's really freaking 10, then I will never be able to give you the radius because it's going to be 10 times pi, which is going to give you some ridiculously impossible to express number. So the uncertainty,
that's crazy.
The uncertainty, the fact that I can never give you the velocity if I've given you the location or vice versa, looks just like that.
Right.
And so that's what I'm saying. Like there's all these things I'm starting to look at it this way, that there's all these things in the fundamental way that the universe works, whether you're on the tiniest quantum level or up, in the macro with us where there's a circle right here that has this problem, right?
Yeah.
There's this one thing that I can't define, just like these quantum particles. Okay. And I'm starting to see these things as little invisible lines that they shoot off into the spirit realm or whatever you would call it, the abstract. It comes off this circle and disappears into, it turns a corner that we can't see. Like I can turn 90 degrees and then I could turn 90 degrees again and then I could turn 90 degrees again, and then if I turn 90 degrees again, I'll be back where I started. But if I could turn another 90 degrees that is different from all of those, I would just vanish, right? That's what this is doing.
Huh. It's an interesting way to look at it.
And so that's what connects it to, because there's all these ancient ideas of like this, that there's two realms, that there's the spirit and the material, right?
Right.
And the spirit has perfect knowledge, but it's the same thing. There's two properties of realms. Like you've got like understanding or knowing or knowledge, and then you have the ability to act
or
to do stuff. In the physical realm, our knowledge is shit. Like, we don't know everything, and we can't ever possibly actually know everything. There's no way. You can't even get close. But we're always acting.
Yeah.
We have perfect ability to act. Whereas in the spirit realm, the ancients would say they had perfect knowledge, but no, they couldn't act because once you know everything, nothing can change. So you can't, like the act of acting changes stuff. So in the spirit realm, it's like an eternal instant. Nothing ever changes. They know everything.
So is that like maybe what they were talking about, or what was written about, saying that God gave man free will?
Right. If you know everything, you don't actually have free will. There's no choice to make if you know. Making a choice like implies that you have imperfect knowledge. Otherwise, the choice would be obvious and it wouldn't be a choice, right?
Yeah. That's badass. Yeah. I don't want to know everything.
Yeah, so like because I'm dumb, I get free will. But if I was like fucking amazingly smart and knew everything, I would not have free will. I would just be I would be like, well, I have to do this because this is obviously right. Yeah.
It's the only
choice. There is no choice if you freaking know everything. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Right. So the reason we see uncertainties and shit down at the quantum level, I'm speculating.
It's because we're dumb, basically. That's what you're saying. That's what you're saying, right?
No, but that might be right. Or that might be another way to say it. I'm trying to say that like somewhere these realms are connected. And we've already talked about this, how our idea that the consciousness and the spirit realm or whatever, the where it interfaces with the material is down there at the quantum level. That's why we see such strange things happening, right? But if you take all this stuff we've just been talking about and think of it in terms of that, now I start to see where these lines are going that are leaving in some 90-degree angle that does not exist in this realm, but it goes somewhere, right? These numbers that cannot be defined here.
Yeah, so we're trying to define things in terms of the world we exist in,
right?
And
pieces of lumps,
right? And like, so we end up with these numbers that are not, they're correct,
but they're never actually,
they're infinite.
Yes,
in fraction or whatever,
right?
Infinite and
yeah, they're continuous, non-repeating forever,
right? So there's a part of it. It's like trying to define the infinite.
Yes.
And so that's I guess that's
like
suggestive that we live in an infinite universe, and we're trying to put these finite definitions to it.
Okay, yeah, or I would say that like there is an infinite something out there that we are connected to.
Right, in terms of, but still, when we talk about the spirit realm, or we talk about that world where you can have perfect knowledge.
Yeah, but they can't do anything.
We can't really describe that,
right,
using anything physical.
Right.
So it's the same problem, like to try to,
but we can
define the infinite.
Yeah, but we can imagine because it's like it's infinite in just what I'm saying, that like they have perfect knowledge but no ability to act. That means that they live in an eternal instant that doesn't ever, time doesn't go
right,
exist there. Because time is an agent of change, right? There's you get entropy and all this bullshit if you have time. So there, everything is like in stasis. It's like a crystalline, single, eternal instant that doesn't ever advance. They can't act, but they know fucking everything. And they probably have the same problem with our realm. Like they see us as being this confusing. You can't really define it from their perspective. The fact that we can do stuff and things change can't really be defined. Right. But we see that. So the way that these realms connect is by information, because information can cross this gulf, just like, the 3.14159. No. That's info. That's data. The streams of infinite numbers in our realm come from theirs. Probably the reverse is happening. That in their realm, there's streams of infinite numbers that are coming from ours, which stem from our ability to do things, to change stuff, to act. And so in that way, we are each realm is affecting the other and being part of its fundamental structure, even though it can't be defined in that realm. So this is what it's been like. It's been blowing my mind for a week. I'm like, okay, wait. It's like it doesn't work here, but it's governing stuff here anyway. And the only way that can work is if it's actually still connected to that other realm.
Yeah.
I'm probably not making any sense. I mean, it still doesn't really.
I'm struggling, but I'm with you on a certain level.
Yeah, that's enough of that. I've been thinking about this for a while and been trying to think of entanglement. There's the mystery of entanglement, right? You got two particles, and once they're entangled, I can take particle A, and I could turn around and run to the other side of the universe with it, and you're sitting here with particle B. And if I take my particle A and reverse its spin, yours will instantly reverse its spin too, right?
Right.
How does that work unless they're connected to each other through some other realm? And they are. The fact that there's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle with these particles tells us that there's some part of them that is being governed by rules from somewhere else that we can't freaking access. Okay, I shouldn't say that way. It implies that.
Yeah.
The uncertainty part, why should this be? Why should there be this uncertainty? If everything was if all the rules were here,
right,
and based on our world, then there shouldn't be any uncertainty. We should have the perfect clockwork universe, the classic. Yeah, the classic Newtonians used to think that
right.
once we had enough knowledge, you could predict anything by knowing the state as it is now. But now we realize that you can't actually know the state as it is now because a bunch of it's foggy, and the more defined you get some parts of the state, the foggier the other parts get. Right? So you don't have a clockwork universe because some of its gears are turning in on an axis that doesn't exist in our universe.
Yeah.
It exists in a different one. So like down there where all the gears are and shit, half of the gears are rotating in a direction that we don't have.
Yeah. That's cool.
I'm done.
Another example of that I mean, I'm thinking of a way that I've run into that a similar problem, like with trying to tune a piano.
Yes.
Like we had talked about frequencies and harmonics and stuff in the last episode.
Yeah.
And how you can have like a waveform and the octave or some harmony is like a perfect, the higher frequency is like a factor or a fraction of the size of the larger one. Right. Well, if you tuned everything perfectly to where there's no third beat or where all the higher frequencies fit perfectly into the lower ones, then as you try to play throughout the different keys of the piano, you'll run into keys that are just totally out of tune and they're it sounds terrible.
Right.
So you have to like stretch. You have to put in these imperfections and then divide the imperfections evenly across or in some way across. And there's like mathematicians who figured out ways
right.
to
And
do
you're
it.
talking about imperfections in terms of this perfect mathematical concept of it.
Right.
You have to like look at this perfect mathematical concept. And if you actually tune the piano like that, it would be off.
It's terrible. Yeah.
Right. So you have to like,
you can only play it in that key.
Right.
This one key.
That's right. So you have to insert flaws and distribute them throughout the system in order to
play through all the different keys.
That the flaws are, I'm suggesting the flaws are the pieces of the other universe, of the spirit realm. Those are the reason those exist, and that we can't see them. Like we have this perfect mathematical formula, and yet when it's expressed in the real world, there's gaps that should not be there.
Yeah.
Those gaps are there because there's another universe that we're interacting with. That's
a really cool way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
so you have to program in the spirit, man. I mean, you gotta tune the piano to the spirit part. You gotta give it its soul or whatever.
Don't forget the soul,
That's
brother.
right. It's gonna sound like shit.
Oh man, that's cool. I'm gonna have to let
crunch on that one.
Let that one brew.
Yeah,
for a little while.
I'm still letting it brew. I was just like, I got to talk about this.
When you brought up the pi relationship the other day at work, I was just like,
yeah,
like wait, no, because wait, that is right. What the hell?
How come it's wait?
So in sacred geometry, they have this. They use these two shapes to represent those two worlds, the measurable and the immeasurable, and that's the square and the circle.
Right. That's why squaring the circle is so fucking hard.
Right.
They can never actually be done totally perfectly.
Right. You can get close.
And guess what you have to do it? You have to extrude it into the third dimension. That was the Egyptian solution for it using the pyramid.
Oh.
They squared the circle by like
taking the radius and standing it up and then making
That's right.
52 degrees, baby.
That's right. And that's why I started to see these non-real numbers as being lines that are standing up off the blueprint.
Well, dude, you totally should have brought up pyramids because now it makes more sense.
It's a pyramid line, bro.
The pyramid line. It's the one that takes us into the other dimension.
That's right. It extends off into the other fucking dimensions.
From another world.
That's right. From the shadows
of the other world.
I was listening to that. I'm just like, oh my God. You're like telling that story. He's like, there's shadows in the clay. That's all this stuff. You're like, shut up, dude.
You have to follow the pyramid line to the shadow of the other world.
Yeah, that's my theory.
Love it.
Best expressed in this evil voice.
Yeah, that's really cool.
All right, we can go ahead and take a break. We're a little early, but not that early.
Yeah, we always go late break on you people, so take an early break. Take that.
That's right. Take 5. Get out now.
Give me a high 1. Snake 5.
Snake 5. High 1.
snakes. We're back. Two snakes in a cube. Talking about science.
Snakes.
Constantly detangentizing. Never straying off in weird tangents for extreme long periods of time.
Not even once.
Not ever. We are
Tangentards.
Mono Bros. One topic. Everything.
Monotopic bros.
We're here in the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science. We're talking about science.
We are science.
Russ is talking about tangents that go off into other dimensions. But we're not going to talk about that anymore.
Yeah, we're done with that.
We're done with that.
I just had to define them, but the undefinable. Just point out that they're there. These lines, they're there.
So I have this other topic, totally different, I want to talk about.
All right. Go
It's
for it.
not a tangent or anything.
Nope, not a tangent. Just new topic.
Well, this is sort of an assessment of the show a little bit. Buddy of mine listens to the show and talks to me about it, and it's really badass. I appreciate all of his input. And one of the things that I would like to point out is how we talk about how we think about things, and how I'll be saying,
It'll be
I think about it this way, or I like to think about it this way, or the way I think about it.
or my idea on this is
My idea, as though it's only ours.
Right.
And that's not really the way it is. I realized after talking to my friend that could be taken or construed in a way not intended by the podcasters.
right.
So we're thinking, and we're trying to think.
It may imply views that are not held by the host of this show.
Yeah, we're trying to think in ways that are sort of outside the box, and pointing that out has been something I've tried to do. Like, hey, this is an example of like how we like to think about stuff, but only to describe that example and not to be saying that's the only way to think about
Right,
things.
and we also, this is a habit that we have from just our conversations with each other. Like we'll be talking about something and I'll say, okay, so the way I've been thinking about this is this.
Right.
And it's not to say that like, here's my like amazing idea, just to inform him, like, so here's how I've been approaching this problem or whatever.
And that actually stems from when we first start, say, talking about some phenomenon in science or whatever, in physics. And we're both approaching it like I understand Russ's approach and the way he's thinking about it. He explains it to me, and then I think it, and I explain the way I think about it to him. And then later, something happens, and I'm thinking about the way he was thinking about it, and comparing it to mine. And then I see something new, and it changes the way I think about it. And I come back and be like, okay, so I'm thinking about it this way now.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's more like that, and also I have definitely tried to like point out specific scenarios where my thinking changed on this thing, and it's this new way of thinking about it, which is just one way of thinking about it,
Right.
that has enlightened me in so many different ways about other things or whatever.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
try to point that out, but I don't mean it in any way like it's the only way to think about it.
Right. Just different approaches reveal different aspects of things. Like if I'm like approaching a building from the north side, I see the stuff on the north side of the building. But if I'm approaching it from the east, I don't see the north side stuff, but I see the stuff on the east side. I'm like, holy crap, look at that stuff. So I might say like, hey, I'm approaching this building from the east,
Right.
you know? And then Kyle could be like, oh, okay. And then he can come over to the east side and approach it that way too, so that he's seeing the same shit that I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not, we're not trying to lay claim to theories or ways of thinking. We're just trying to say, so here's how I'm approaching this right now, so that you can get on the same path with me, and not be lost at whatever I'm talking about, because you're looking at the fucking west side of the building or whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll get excited about a way of thinking about something, and I'm just like, I'm thinking about it. Yeah, but I'm thinking about it like this.
Yeah.
And because I'm thinking about it like this, I'm seeing all of this other stuff, and it's,
Right,
But it doesn't mean it's the only way to think about it, because I'm actually not really sure the way of thinking about things. I mean, there's so many different ways. And so it's like trying to find new ways of thinking about things is cool.
Right. Especially when like I'm just describing something I've been thinking about, and it's a topic that he also thinks about, but he thinks about it however he thinks about it. But now I'm describing these things that I've been coming up with or whatever, just, you know, randomly, or I'm reading and stuff. But those things make him, in his direction, see entirely new things.
Right.
That then he points out to me, and then I'm like, holy shit, like, because I didn't think of those. I didn't see them from my direction. You know, it's that it goes back and forth until we, like, sometimes we'll develop, because of that, because we're sharing, like, here's how I'm thinking about it, here's how he's thinking about it, back and forth. With that sharing of perspective leads to a greater picture.
Right. And often, because you may not be totally right in everything in this one way of thinking about something, but you can't tell.
Yeah.
But then somebody else comes along with another way of thinking about it, and they're not completely right about the way they think about it from that angle. But when you combine the two, a lot of times it's like falsification.
Yeah,
you can
like,
see,
oh, I was wrong there.
Yeah. And you combine them. And so we've done this also back and forth for years on the theory of waves and frequencies and all this, and vibration in various different aspects of physics, back and forth, and refined each other's way of thinking about it based on new ways of thinking that sort of will show or shed light on some of the bad areas or things that don't make sense in the way we were thinking about it before.
Or something that was hard to, like, when you were thinking about it before, you're like, okay, how do I think about this? How does this work? Where do I even start with this part? You know, and then somebody will come across, one of us will come across something and be like, okay, check this out. You know, and just say that, and like, and then suddenly that sheds light on this entire area where before we were just like, what is going on here? Why is it so fucking dark?
Yeah, so I wanted to clear the air because I realized, you know, after my friend was giving me this input that, okay, maybe we should stop doing that, you know, stop saying it that way. But just in this last segment,
use the royal we. So we were thinking about this,
or another way of thinking is just one way of thinking about it is
a possible way of considering this is
right. But just in the last segment, I realized like that's going to be impossible.
Yeah,
I mean that's going to take a lot of discipline and trial and error to get to that point, which you know is possible.
Maybe we should just have a rule and remove all personal pronouns.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Entirely from the show.
That's going to be difficult. So
can't say mine.
Damn it. So the idea, one idea was to just talk about this as a topic and clear the air. So it's not about my idea or my way of thinking. It's just an expression that we've become. Has become something used by Snake Bros when conversing amongst themselves.
Right. And it's also, I'm hoping at this point, like anybody who's been listening to the shows can tell that to us, ways of thinking about things is transient. I mean, I know that there's several topics that we've discussed on multiple shows where, like, on the next show, we discuss it from a completely different point of view.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we've definitely done that with frequency and waves. Like, so one of the reasons why we say, here's how I'm thinking about it, because it's actually maybe like the sentence should fully be like, here's how I'm thinking about this right now.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like a lot of times we'll say, I need to approach the building from the west side just for now, just so I can get what's over there, because like I want to approach from the northeast, but I need to see what's on the west side, so that as I'm approaching from the northeast, there will be certain things that are clear that weren't, right? So we'll say,
fuck yeah. I'm pointing at him right now at his face. Fuck yeah. That's bring it back to the pyramid, bro.
That's right.
I'm approaching the pyramid from the west.
Yes. Approaching a pyramid
right now, so that I can describe to you accurately the way it looks from the north.
Yeah. So here's my approach right now. Like, even though that's not ever how we're going to approach it again. But right now I'm approaching it this way because we got to see this one block. And now that we've seen that one block, we can go back over here and approach it from underground, which is where we want to come in. And now that one block makes sense. Like this whole piece over here that didn't make any fucking sense now makes sense because we approach it from over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you approach it above the King's Chamber, there's a cartouche that says the way you've approached this entire thing is wrong.
It's a tomb.
That's a really interesting topic, actually. I didn't think it was going to be this interesting.
It is pretty interesting.
But hell yeah.
Like
it's changing the way I'm thinking about this.
Yes, it is. It's shifting my thought patterns on this. Well, like one of the things we've done this with is electricity.
Absolutely.
Like, because once you realize that nobody fucking knows what electricity is or how it works, really, that sort of just kind of opens up every possibility of the ways of looking at it. And so like this happened to me too with, as a general principle, I started to think of like, there are it's not really called this, but the standard model ways of looking at all these different things, right?
That's another.
You bring up any given topic, and there's like, bam, there is like a particular way of approaching that topic, any given topic, that is going to be the mainstream, considered to be true by everyone, or whatever.
We call it the pop approach. It's like pop topics.
Pop topics.
It's like the popular way of doing it, right?
Right. Yeah. Or it's mainstream. It's whatever you want to call it. But like, so somebody will discuss like comparative mythology, right? So you've got like comparative mythology is one thing I'm fascinated with, in the idea that all these different cultures were interacting with something that they all named different, but were the same things. Like, you know, so you've got all these different gods in all these different cultures, but they weren't different. They were actually the same beings, just being named differently by all these. So comparative mythology is something where you look at how China has viewed its gods and spirit, and then you look at how Rome, and then you look at how like Peru, you know, all these ancient Peruvian cultures, and you see the same. You see hints that really what we're talking about is a single set of entities or whatever, people that produced all of these different mythologies, but even though all the mythologies are different, the origin of them is the same thing. Okay, there is a mainstream way of looking at that. Okay, and it's very like, I've tried to talk to like comparative mythologists before because I'm fascinated with the subject. I'm like, look, Enki is like all these people. Right? He's this guy and this guy and this guy, and he did this, and he was Viracocha, and he was freaking, you know, and they're like, no. And they explain all this. They basically say, yeah, we see those connections, but then they Skerptard themselves out of it. Okay?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is that any given topic will have a sort of mainstream approach that everyone knows, that everyone's familiar with. And I'm like, I just realized one day, I think I was commenting somewhere on some website where I was like, yeah, dude, like we all know that way of looking at it. Like all of us know that because everyone looks at it that way. So what we're trying to do here is look at it some other way. You don't need to come in here and tell me like, no, this is how it is. Because we know that. We fucking know that way of looking at it. We're trying something else out, you know? We're not saying it's true. We're just saying like, yes, here's the standard way to look at it, but here's another possibility. That's what we're trying to do. And so I just started to think of it in that term, like, what's wrong with that? Like, we all know the ways that, you know, we've been taught in school or whatever, just through culture, like, you know, the standard way of looking at something of any given topic. But there are other ways of looking at it that are valid, especially if you think of it just in terms of like, I'm just doing philosophy. I'm just like speculating here, you know,
right.
I'm like, what does this look like if I approach from the West instead of from the Northeast every fucking time? Right?
Yes.
So that actually opened it up even more for me in the sense that I like, once I realized what I was doing, instead of trying to defend like, no, I don't have to defend the idea that what I'm saying is real. I'm just like, no, dude, there's just another way of looking at it. You know, like here's a possibility. Like what you're saying is a possibility that we all fucking know, so we don't need to talk about it. Right? But they get so annoyed that you're not talking about it that way, and they think you're totally dumb, and they've got to come in there and tell you the way that everybody fucking already knows. And I'm just like, yeah, but why is it that you think that it's wrong for us to look at it in a different way? We're not saying that this is true. We're just like, well, so look at all these things that correlate, and look at all this interesting stuff. And they're like, no, that's not how it is. I'm like, okay, man. I promise you we know the standard story.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually with electricity, that was one of the early topics that we did this with.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so they don't really know what the force is or what this.
Yeah.
we've got all these terms that define sort of
that give pictures that aren't right.
Yeah, but also we can test the effects of the thing. It's like gravity. It's the same deal. It's like we all know that if you jump out of the window, you fall. And so it's like
no one needs to test that. We might want to test.
I can see Russ like getting ready to explode right now. Yeah. What's the thing that
where they correlate it to evolution or whatever, like because you're like, well, evolution is just a theory, and they're like, well, yeah, well, gravity is just a theory too. You could jump out the fucking window if you want to test that one. Like, no, that's not. That is not what's happening. Gravity is a phenomenon that is observed by everyone all day, every day for their entire lives. No one has ever observed speciation in evolution, so it is not like questioning that is not the same as jumping out the fucking window to question gravity. First of all. Second of all, there is no fucking theory of gravity. But anyway, we can go.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Don't bring up the bananas. Like,
sorry.
I'll fucking rant for the entire
I know. I just saw you like when I brought up gravity. But the point is
makes me want to test gravity by throwing them out the fucking window.
The point is that we can see the effects and we can predict the outcome with things like gravity and we can do math, which helps us predict it and use it as a tool.
We have laws, yeah.
But
the laws of gravity.
It doesn't tell us what it is. Like no one knows what the force is, where it comes from.
Right. It's gravitons.
I mean, they theorize that it comes from a collection of matter.
Right, and they do that because that's the way the law works. If you look at the way that the law of gravity, which is not a theory, it's just a law that tells us if you use this formula, you can predict the what gravity will do to stuff. And the way that is like,
and it works.
Center of mass of a given object, distance from that to the center of mass of another given object, and you take the mass of those two objects, and then you use the inverse square, and you can tell what their gravitic relationship will be to each other. So they assume that because you have to use the mass and the center of mass, that the mass is the origin.
Right.
False assumption. Maybe true, but false assumption. could end up being true, but is not like necessarily true.
Yeah.
So
we keep talking about how electricity had something to do with this, but it's more like gravity.
well, electricity is the same in the sense that like the name electron, like they have these assumptions about what's going on.
Right. No one's ever actually seen an electron.
And you look at like, so you've got this electrical system and it's got a positive side and a negative side, but you're like, all electrons are negative. So where are the positive ones? What's the positive part of this system? And then why does it have to be in a circle? Like how come it only works when everything is connected back to the origin?
I don't know.
And then because of that, they treat it like there's a flow, right? But there isn't a flow. Like there's no discernible flow. You connect the power source to a system and bam, that system is full of power. Like instantly. It's not, there's no flow. It doesn't go from here to the next one.
The idea is that you know, the conductor, you know, the copper rod has
to drag electrons.
Has all these electrons in it, and once you connect the system, it's like the electrons at the end of the copper immediately start flowing out because the other ones on the other side are moving.
Right. So you're pushing the copper electrons out of it and shoving them full of like battery electrons.
Right.
Is that what's happening?
Yeah. So I don't know. I've been trying to figure it out, and I have no idea.
Like I was doing this to somebody we were hanging out, and I was like, so if you imagine like you've got a metal plate that's 100,000 miles to a side. It's just this gigantic iron plate. Okay, it's 100,000 miles by 100,000 miles. It's like freaking, it's immense. And I connected a lead to it. Just bam, connected like an AC lead to it, and you went way out in the middle of the plate somewhere and connected another lead to it, and you would have power coming off there.
Right, possibly at the speed of light.
Right, maybe it would go at the speed of light, but how does the power know to go to that spot in this gigantic plate?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like Tesla said, you can treat the entire Earth as a small metal ball in terms of conductivity. There is no, because everything is moving either instantaneously or at the speed of light or at extremely fast speeds, the Earth is functionally a small metal ball in terms of you put a lead here and then put another lead over there.
Right.
Right? So
that's kind of the way, like we have a power station and it's miles and miles and miles away.
Yeah.
And they send one polarity down a wire.
Yeah.
And they stick the other polarity into the ground.
Right. I love that fact, man. Whenever I'm like online and they're like, "Oh, that Tesla system doesn't work," I'm like, "Really? Well, if every circuit has to be a circuit, has to go all the way around, how come only one wire comes to your house?" And they're like,
Yeah, the other end of your circuit goes into the ground at your house.
The negative that plugs you back into the power station, the power generating plant, whatever it is, if it's a nuclear or hydro generating plant that's hundreds of miles away, you just shove a freaking copper rod into the ground. And that connects you somehow to the power plant that's hundreds of miles away, and it's got copper rods shoved into the ground.
Right.
Because you can treat the entire Earth as a small metal ball.
Right. So we've talked about the idea that there's a resonance in that electricity basically is a resonating stuff, right? That there's the matter is being vibrated by this force, whatever it is.
Right, and like it's the AC vibration, the reversing polarity, but there's also that, what was the extremely high actual frequency of like just electricity, period.
Right. There's
something really, really freaking high.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
But I guarantee you it's on the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right, it's in the electromagnetic spectrum. So there's like this vibration that's happening on the quantum level or whatever.
Yeah, it would be down at the electron level, which is basically
like light.
Yeah, photons are supposedly massless, but we all know they're not particles too. That's the other thing. Is like we talk about them in terms of like they're little dots, but they're not. They're waves.
Yeah, and then sometimes they're dots.
Right. So they act like dots when they have to.
When you hit
but only when you're looking.
When you hit them with a hammer,
right?
They act like a dot.
If you hit them with a hammer, they're like ow, and then it's like they're a dot. Briefly, the wave turns into a dot because you hit a wave with a hammer, it turns into a dot. Everybody knows that.
This is probably not making any sense, but
yeah. So
needless to say,
can we make it make sense?
We've changed the way we thought about this, and right now I'm at a point where I don't really know how to think about it because I've been listening to Richard Feynman's interviews and listening to his lectures. He's a physicist.
You got all these things jiggling.
Yeah.
I love that when he's talking about atoms. Yeah. They're all jiggling.
Yeah. Everything's jiggling, see? But yeah, I'm listening to his lectures on this stuff, and I'm back in the weeds. Like I don't.
What's interesting is he keeps saying that too. Like as I'm listening to him, he keeps pointing out like we don't actually know what this is. Like no one knows why this is happening. And I'm like, okay, so we're all in the weeds. That's
right.
Fine.
We're all in the weeds.
Yeah, that's fine.
But he understands certain things on the. Okay, one of the things that he said, which was fascinating to me, was that things on the quantum level act like nothing you are familiar with.
Right. He said there's no correlate.
You can't paint a picture of the way these things act on the quantum level because there is no picture in the larger scale that is anything like them.
Right. He said,
and so
you can't use an analogy because they're false. Yeah.
Right. So he says after experimenting with these things and dealing with them and doing the math and beginning to get a grasp, like after many, many, many years of research and study and experiment, he has sort of a grasp on the way they interact, right? And that was how he was able to develop all these principles of the quantum
and the Feynman diagrams,
right? Yeah. The Feynman diagrams. But you look at the diagrams and you're like, "What is that? Some ancient text?
Yeah,
some dead language?
What?
But yeah, so he's got this understanding of it based on his experience with it. But he's still, after 30, 40 years of studying
struggles to explain
has
it.
no way to analogize it or whatever that's a word.
There's no correlate to anything we know.
Right. So that kind of just was like, okay, why am I?
He starts talking about like bullets and you got your detector and you're going to shoot bullets and then you got your weight, you're going to throw weight, you're going to make waves and you got your detector for that. And then he shows you how both of these are part of the quantum thing and how it'll switch from one to the other depending on what's happening. It's like, and I don't even know if I want to go into that, like the double slit experiment problem, but it basically kind of implies that, I mean, it doesn't kind of. If you look at stuff, you change them. You know?
Right. Well, the way we look at stuff is by...
You have to bounce light off of it.
Right. We have to look at it with matter.
Yeah.
With stuff. Right. So
you have to bounce waves of light off of something to see it. And so if you're looking at a quantum particle as this tiny little bitty thing, but it's emanating as waves, and then you shoot waves at it to be able for them to reflect off of it for you to see it, it's going to change the waves that you're looking at. Yeah, exactly. Intrinsically. And so, yeah.
So you can't, and that's part of the uncertainty principle is like you can't.
It's also the observer principle. Yeah, the observer problem. Sorry. Yeah.
Right. So I was just, that the way he was describing how he cannot describe this thing in any way that relates to anything that you know.
Yeah.
Because of that, they act so differently than everything that we know on the large scale. I have
an idea about that because I was listening to this the other day. You sent me the link and I'm listening, and I just let it keep playing. It kept going to the next video and playing more Feynman stuff. And I eventually get to where he's teaching a class. And I looked at it briefly. I was doing a bunch of other work, but I looked at the video and I see it's black and white and he's a young man. And I said, he's like, so here's quantum stuff, right? And as he was doing the whole thing you're talking about, he was explaining like, so I'm going to tell you how these things work. And I am not going to like give you analogies to any real life things because there aren't any, and you need to not try to plug them into any real life. Just like take what I say and say, this is how it works. And don't try to say it's like this or it's like that because it's not like anything. Right. So I'm listening to that and, I started to think about the vast difference between the mainstream storyline, or just like the way that, like, this thing we were just talking about a little while ago, like here's the way people think about stuff because that's how we're all taught Western thinking or whatever, and all the gaps in that. Like, in other words, if you ever start looking into weird stuff, UFOs, ghosts, paranormal shit, whatever, like all these different ancient mysteries, all this kind of stuff, you start to see that there's these huge gaping gaps in that mainstream story. And the mainstream story is largely defined now. It used to be defined by religion and superstition, but now it's largely defined by science, the Church of Science, right? This massive institution that isn't science itself, but is the institution of science people and science stuff. So they've got this story that they tell of the world. Here's how the world works. Here's and it skips all these different things, ignores various things that it can't explain or won't quite fit into the picture that they've been painting or whatever. And I was wondering, like, so I'm listening to Feynman say, you can't plug this into any analogous real stuff. And I'm thinking, but it's because our picture of the world is not complete because they've been ignoring a bunch of shit. So I was wondering,
holy shit.
The gaps in the story are why we can't see the quantum stuff.
Like a lot of that is in the paranormal, for example.
Exactly.
Like the Church of Science largely ignores the paranormal as people just seeing shit, making it up. It was the swamp gas from Venus, but if they actually perhaps started to think about these large scale things in our that are that possibly really occurring, then maybe the quantum stuff might make sense. Like you've been for a while now talking about how the quantum level is where the interaction from the spiritual world takes place.
Right.
So that yes. So that's brilliant.
Yeah. So and then I'm listening to Feynman, who is like the quintessential like hard physicist in the sense that
but he's also the physicist who bucked the conventional wisdom all of his life.
Right. Yes, but has an essentially and completely and totally open mind, except when it comes to certain things, like
in the spiritual.
when I'm reading his biography or whatever, like he's doing these basically out of body experiences that he's inducing he's using a float tank, right? And he's experimenting with like putting his perceptual awareness in places that are not. First, he tries to move it from where everybody's is, like sort of behind your eyes in your head. He kind of shifts it down to his belly button. And he's like, well, that's interesting. And then he moves it out of his body. So he's floating in this tank and he's kind of in his trance state. And he's just playing around with being able to move his perceptual center into places that are not contiguous with his physical form, to the point to where he gets behind his head, right? And he said that he had his hands laced back there or whatever, and his perception is coming from behind his head, and he's looking, and he realizes that as he looks through his fingers that are laced behind his head, he sees light through them. In other words, that his head wasn't there. He was seeing the sky, which also wasn't there because he was in a freaking closed float tank, right? So he's seeing something in an altered state with his physical awareness shifted to behind himself, where he's looking at the back of his own head and realizing that that head isn't there. And he's like, well, he just kind of like explains it all away with like, yeah, well, it's my mind playing tricks on me. You know what? I'm like, wait, what? What?
Yeah,
like,
I remember that.
The way he analyzes everything is so perfect. And then he gets to certain things like that, and he's just like, nah, whatever.
Yeah.
He's just making shit up. I'm just like, okay. So he has this blindness too.
I also noticed that. What was he describing? Continue.
But I watch him struggle with the quantum stuff. Maybe not struggle with it so much thinking about it, but struggling to express it.
To express it, yeah.
And I'm wondering if these things are correlated. Like,
I remember what it was. He experiments with dreaming. He's like, well, what happens?
Right, yeah.
What happens when people sleep? Does your thought process just stop?
Yeah.
Or does your thinking slow down? Like
right.
real slow. So he starts experimenting with sleeping, and he's like, I'm gonna go to sleep awake.
Yeah.
And he eventually achieves this, and he starts lucid dreaming and doing all this crazy shit. And he's like, okay,
whatever. Yeah.
All right, I'm done with that.
Yeah. So it's basically I'm just making shit up as I'm sleeping. And I'm like, what?
But he did like all kinds of crazy shit in his sleep.
Yeah. He did a lot. Yeah.
I can't remember specifics. I have to look it up again.
Right. He gets into the lucid dreaming where he realizes he can like completely, with some discipline and some mental discipline, can control the world that he's in there. Right. Which makes him say, so this world that I'm in the dream is entirely in my head. Like, because I can change it. I can make the colors shift. I can move the people around. It's something that's completely entirely inside my head. But then he begins to do what I would call like OBEs, like out of body. Or some people, like maybe more spiritually, people would call it astral travel, right? Where he gets himself into a lucid dream, and then he has the typical transition into the OBE, where now, okay, so anyone who was not like a hardcore materialist science, who had never looked at any of this stuff before, would realize that transition right there meant you went from the dream to something else. I wouldn't be able to define what that something else is, but it is no longer your dream. And then he starts trying to. He doesn't know that though, and he's trying to control it, and like it's not working. Like he wants to, he doesn't want that bridge to be there, and it won't leave. And he's like, and then he starts to think that he's losing control of the dream, and I'm like, no, bro, no, you're not in the.
Maybe you were getting out of your own mind's little world into the real world that's in that.
Right,
state.
and there are entities out there, and so he starts to interact with these things that are not part of his dream realm. In other words, they're not people that he knows or whatever. They're not nightmares either. They're just things that he would never think of. And he's like, what the fuck? It's a glowing snake, and he's talking to it or whatever. Yeah. Never something he's seen in his dreams. And yet it has this appearance of agency, that it is its own thing or whatever, I can't remember all the details, but basically he talks himself into believing that he is like failing at lucid dreaming now, that he's somehow lost the knack. I'm like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
And then, he eventually stops, and I'm like, no, you didn't.
That's interesting. Huh.
So I wonder if all this quantum stuff that we because look, it's what system can you think of where you go down to the fundamental parts of it, the smallest bits, and you look at the way they work and say, these things work completely differently than everything else in the system that is made up of these things.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I know of that's like that.
Right. And it just happens to be the universe, but still. So you're like, it's like everything does that, bro. I know, but I
love your point that when science went on this, because science used to be a long time ago was like merged with religious beliefs and stuff. And maybe there was a time when that was not healthy.
Well,
certain
science is supposed to be a method. Right. That's how I'm like, science is a method. Like, it doesn't matter what you think about this thing you're about to look at. Just look at it.
Yeah, I guess
science.
what I should say is spirituality. The idea of spirituality was part of it. Yeah. And then there came a point when sort of the spiritual institutions started being not spiritual. Yeah. And becoming more like governments. And then then the scientific method, or people that were doing science, were persecuted. Right. And now it's not exactly the other way around, but it's like
it is a response to that, though.
There's this culture in science, or the institutions of science, to sort of reject the institutions of religion, which I don't blame them,
right,
or anybody, or whatever. The point is that
superstitious
to
nonsense.
Also reject the idea of spirituality just outright, which has kind of become the way it is,
and not just spirituality, but the paranormal in general.
The paranormal is what I
like, to the point to where you have like militant atheists who are like, you know, you die and there's nothing. I'm like, well, that sounds great, bro. I hope you're looking forward to that. Like, is that what you tell your kids? Don't worry, kids. When you die, there's just nothing.
Yeah. So I don't know where I was going with that.
Sorry. Derailed.
Yeah, derailed. Successful. I guess we'll just take a break then.
Well, I know where you were going with it. It's like they have like, there's a whole section of topics in which they're like, these things are not real.
Yes. So in so doing, they've limited the macro view of the universe.
Right.
And so when they begin to look at the micro, the
things that everything is made of,
right? Then they can't make sense of it because it doesn't fit,
right? So
into their macro view.
They're like, well, the macro world, the macro world does not have any of these properties of the micro world of the quantum world. And I'm suggesting, we are both kind of doing this now, that we're suggesting that that's because they have ignored the parts of the macro world that contain the strongest presences of those things in the micro world.
Right, the things that don't act the right way according to the macro
That's
world.
Right. They do not follow Newtonian physics.
That is really interesting. So I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think that when they started making these discoveries on the quantum level, the scientific community was just like, no.
Right, yeah.
But they ended up proving it.
Yes.
Like mathematically, that this is what's happening.
And experimentally.
And experimentally. So the scientific community had to accept that grudgingly.
Right.
But there's been no such thing, such a scientific endeavor that has forced them to then accept this on the
right.
macro scale.
It's something happened called shut up and calculate, which is basically like, so here's this quantum stuff, and it like, you can immediately start to see how it does a whole bunch of shit that we want to be like, that's not real. But experimentally, over and over and over and over, and with like the best controls and everything, we have shown, and mathematically, we've shown that it is actually does work this way. And so that actually has all these philosophical like. It you know, if you started to look at the philosophy of this, like instead of just the science, but you started to say, well, what does that mean that it works this way? It might destroy your whole paradigm. So they said, don't do that. Don't think of the philosophy of like these things working this way. Just fucking shut up and calculate. Like, don't talk about the philosophy of like why the quantum works this way. Don't think about what the ramifications of that are. Just make smartphones.
Bad move.
So we have things like smartphones, which work on quantum principles all over the place, like solid state, memory, all these different things we have that work on quantum principles, because they've been shutting up and calculating for like 100 years. They have been like getting the benefits of this quantum science without even acknowledging the philosophical implications of the fact that things work this way. So the blindness is now perpetual and intentional. Like somebody was like, we want this ability, we want these powers, this new stuff that we'll get with this, but we do not want people to think about what this actually means.
I need to take a break so I can collect the pieces of my brain that are laying around.
No, shut up and calculate. Okay, we'll take a break.
Fuck.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll be back sometime.
Snakes.
Yeah, with quantum. The abyss looks back. Snake. Folks, welcome back to the 10 by 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 10 quantum cube of psyche.
The intangible cube of psyche.
We are in the superposition of not knowing what we're doing.
Superposition of superstition.
That's right. All is a cloud of probability. We have no idea what we're doing, how long we've been here, or how long we're going to stay here, or what we're even going to talk about.
I just re-entered the fog. That last segment, I was just like, wait. Now everything that I had been looking at something in this certain way that I was looking at it, I can't look at it like that anymore.
Oh yeah, I not me, but like the ideas we were talking about, like swiped our
palettes,
our Descartes tables clean. You know, Descartes was the one that like I think, therefore I am. Cogito, what is it? Cogito sum ergo sum, something like that. I think, therefore I am, because he's basically like, what can we really know, right? So we picture like, here's a table with all this stuff on it that we think we know. Like, take all that shit off the table, just sweep it off, sweep the table clean. What can I put back on the table using logic, starting from nothing? And he was like, I can't put anything back on the table, except for the fact that
I'm thinking about it.
I'm asking the question, therefore I think, therefore I am. That was the only thing he could put back on the table. All the stuff that we think we know stays off the table.
Yeah.
So that's all that happened to you. You just went back to really what's going on. Just all that shit's off.
Yeah, it was like, you know, when you're laying down on a grassy knoll and you're looking up at the sky and you're like, yeah, that cloud is a puppy dog. And that cloud is a baseball bat. And that one is a UFO! UFO! Slate clean.
That's right.
No, but seriously, I'm back to just like, wait a minute. I'm in the clouds.
Yeah, it's like I don't even see any clouds anymore.
Yeah, this is
because I'm in the cloud.
I'm gonna have to really crunch on this. That idea that the missing aspects of reality
in the mainstream story
would possibly correlate to these strange quantum things is testable.
Right, it is testable.
Like, that's falsifiable.
Yes.
Holy shit.
I mean, it's
holy shit.
Just on the face of it, you can see some of the correlations, like superposition, where something is in two states at once, right? Like a quantum superposition would be something is rotating and not rotating at the same time. Okay, that's called quantum superposition. And I've always I'm looking at these superposition experiments. I'm like, how do you check for that? Like, they shine a laser at this thing and they say, okay, it's the laser, the data that the laser is returning says it's rotating, and it's also not rotating. I'm like, I think you're just confused, but that's because I'm trying to correlate it to stuff that I know. You know, like something can't both be in rotation and not be in rotation.
Unless, it's like a ghost.
Right.
Is both.
It has an aspect that
isn't in this world, but but it's not really in our world.
That's right.
It's behind the veil.
That's right.
It's behind the veil.
It's shadows in the clay.
They're just shadows. Shadows of the 10 by 10.
Yeah, that would be
intangible.
I tried to draw a 10 by 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 10 cube one time. It didn't work.
A couple of those 10s are turning 90 degrees in a different world.
That's right. I don't know how to draw that 90-degree angle. Especially on a 2D piece of paper.
So let's talk about ghosts for a minute.
Okay.
Let's just go at it.
All in.
What is okay. I know you've looked into this a lot and like, people have tried to, record it in some way or show something. They've tried to use this box that doesn't include any of the other stuff that should be in the box to record what's going on over here in this.
Right.
Like in the box, I mean by conventional science.
Yes. Well, I think the problem with I'm always like, man, if you guys look at the way conventional science is dealing with quantum mechanics, and they're just saying, okay, so it acts weird. Whatever. Just let's figure out how it acts weird, define those things, and then work with that. If they did that with the paranormal, fuck. Like, that's real science, right? Like, they're doing they're ignoring their mind saying it can't be this way and saying it fucking is this way. Let's just deal with it. And they're getting somewhere. We have smartphones. It's like proof.
Right. And really, if you think about it, that if you look at okay, let me just put it this way. Anybody out there listening right now, why don't you go test the idea that an electron exists?
Yeah, that's hard.
Right. Because I can hear the skeptics saying, well, you can't test the paranormal because like you can't like touch it and see that. Well, you can't fucking touch an electron. You can't fucking see them.
Right.
You have to, and they figured it out with math somehow. Or they figured out something.
We extrapolate they exist by anecdotal things that we experience.
Right.
This is the same thing that happens with ghosts. They're just
That's
like,
what
well,
I'm
that's
saying.
bullshit. That's just an anecdote. Well, yeah. But the fact that static electricity just shocked you when you touched the door is also anecdotal.
Right. So you have this huge group of people and these massive institutions that have been working on this for like, the past 100 years.
Yeah.
And they're backed by governments and all this money and everything. And they've built these huge fucking machines and, all of this shit to test an experiment with these things that we can't see and we can't touch and we can't smell and we can't sense in any further way.
Yeah.
But so when you try to say, oh, well then go show me a ghost and I'll like measure it and shit. Well, no, you can't show me a fucking electron and I'll measure it.
Right. Show me a proton or a photon.
So how would you imagine that we could go about maybe setting up an environment or do you just go where it is? Like with paranormal stuff, it's like this house is haunted, so we got to go there.
Well,
how do you get?
That's kind of like
how do you get to that level to where you could where they could actually begin to build instruments designed based off of this the way this shit that we can't see or feel or touch works, and then try to test it.
I think it will develop from the quantum stuff. I mean, like if you look at the,
but there has to be a will.
Yeah, so one of the coolest experiments I've recently heard about it was a TED Talk that I watched or whatever. I might have showed you part of it, where the guy was talking about how he just kind of he just didn't buy this whole thing that like these quantum effects do not translate into the macro realm. He was just like, why do you say that? You say that because you can't think of anything in the macro realm that has these quantum effects, but how do we know that for real? Like scientifically, do we know that? No one's tested for it. They're just assuming it because like I walk around, I don't see anything doing two things at once.
I gotcha, yeah.
Right. So he was like, no, so screw this. So he describes this whole experiment where he was like, we had this tiny sliver of metal and it was a microscopic piece of metal. But in terms of the quantum realm, it is a fucking gigantic, humongous object. Okay. Because he was like, it was a sliver of metal. You had to use a microscope to see it. But it was made up of millions and millions of molecules, which means on the quantum level, it's gigantic. Okay, so he had that, and it was attached to a bunch of sensors, circuit board, or whatever. And then he starts telling this analogy of being in the elevator. He's like, if you go into an elevator, right? If the elevator's got people and if it's full of people, you go in the elevator and you stand there and you're very calm and you don't do anything interesting. You watch like a security cam video of people in the elevator and they're all standing there and just not doing anything at all. They're just standing there being people in the elevator. But if you go in the elevator and you're alone, you do all sorts of weird shit because there's no one in there with you. You're like poking, you're looking in there. You're like, could I open that fucking thing up there? You do all kinds of interesting things because there's no one else there.
Do that? Look up to see if there's the door.
Right. Yes. Whatever you do. He just says, he was talking about that. He's like, I do all kinds of weird stuff when there's no one in the elevator but me. So he uses this analogy to say, so I thought maybe quantum stuff was like this. Like they don't do all that quantum shit when there's a whole bunch of other stuff around, right? Just like a bunch of people in the elevator, they all stand there, like not doing anything interesting because there's people around. But as soon as everyone's gone, you're by yourself, you're like, wee, and you start doing all this weird shit. So he takes this piece of metal, this little tiny sliver of metal that he had, and he put it in a Faraday cage, which basically removes all electromagnetic radiation from around it. So it's in pitch black. There's no radio waves, nothing. All the electromagnetic radiation has been blocked. He drops it down to absolute zero, which gets rid of the heat, which is also in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Creating jiggling.
Right. So he drops it down to as close to absolute zero as we can get, because if you think heat is also electromagnetic.
Right.
Okay. So he gets it down to absolute zero. So now, and he pulls a vacuum. So now there's no air molecules around it. There's no photons like representing heat waves. There's no any other kind of light or anything like that, and it's all by itself in this vacuum. And he said that they were and then they hit it with a laser. They basically like pinged it like you would hit a bell with a hammer. Ding! They hit it with a laser, and since it had been dropped to absolute zero, it had stopped all the jiggling. Right? It was motionless. When they hit it with that laser, it entered a superposition where it was both vibrating from the laser hit and not vibrating because it was in absolute zero. So he was like, so there we have a macro object. I mean, yes, it's microscopic, but in terms of the quantum level,
right,
it is a fucking macro object in a quantum superposition. So that just completely disproves the entire idea that these things do not translate to the macro realm. He was just like, they attenuate or something when there's a whole bunch of other stuff around keeping you from doing it. Right. Or he was just saying like,
there's when there's a whole bunch of other stuff around, there's such a catastrophe going on that you can't really tell what it would be doing.
The states
otherwise.
change so quickly because of Brownian motion and everything's running into everything else.
Right.
So maybe you are in all these various superpositions, but it just kind of looks like you're sort of a cloud of probability instead of, like you can't really tell where something is and like how fast it's going at the same time because it's interacting with a billion different things at once on the quantum level, all of who also have like multiple different properties.
So quantum particles are self-conscious.
Yeah. If you look at them, they stop being waves. They're like, nope, I'm just a particle. As soon as you look away, they're like, whee! Turn back into a wave and fly. So that was a fascinating experiment, which as soon as, so I hear that, I'm like, okay, so how do I start interacting with the world with this in mind? Like that quantum effects do take place in some way here in the macro realm. Maybe they're not as apparent though, because like, and this is the case with anything. When you drill down to the most basic level, you're going to see aspects of it that are present in the larger scale that are just very subtle in the larger scale because
there's so much other
there's all this because you're looking at a big picture. So like like zooming in on a picture on a computer, you start to see all these square. You start to see a grid. Okay, the pixel grid. That grid is still there when you're looking at the picture zoomed out.
Right.
But you can't tell. I mean, it looks like an image that's a very perfect representation of the world that it was taking a picture of. But you zoom in and you say, no, that's not actually a picture. That's a fucking grid, a very sharply defined of all these little squares, and each square is only one color. The color doesn't change across each individual square. Each individual square is a specific color that doesn't change. Whereas when you zoom out, you're like, man, this color's fading in and out everywhere, right? So the quantum effects are here. And just like with a JPEG or an image on a computer, under certain circumstances, you will see macro effects that reflect the fact that these quantum things are going on. Like so in a JPEG, if you've compressed it too much or you zoom out too much, you see like these blocky things appear in the large image, right? Or around where color changes are happening, you see these blocky things. Those are indications that this is actually made of a grid and it's not really what you think it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are shadows of the quantum effect. Okay. Shadows of the quantum effect. Yeah. So I think the same thing is going on with most paranormal things, in the sense that those are like the JPEG artifacts of the quantum effects translating into the macro under certain conditions. So when people see UFOs or they have interactions with entities or, I mean, I don't know, just.
Yeah. That just, it's like pics or it didn't happen, right? So like somebody sees a ghost. They're seeing this ghost. They're experiencing this ghost.
Right.
And they take a picture of it.
Yeah.
But they can't, it's like the same problem with trying to look at an atom. You can't just look at one. Yeah. Because it's hauling ass and doing all this crazy shit.
Right.
You can't look at, a particle on it or whatever because you can't ever tell where it is.
And if you try, you mess it up. You disturb the system so much that it becomes not whatever you were looking at.
So it's like, with the quantum stuff, picture didn't happen, right? They
yeah.
But they know it did.
Yes.
So it's the same problem. They can't actually give you a picture of it.
Right. The picture arrives by inference. Right. Like you infer that these things are taking place because you've set up various types of mirrors and detectors around for things to bounce off of. Yeah.
So we are made up of a collection of sensors.
Yeah.
All different types that detect things and vibrations.
That's right. Don't say that word. Oh, you meant like, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Not that.
That was dumb. Collection of sensors. Stop saying that. Can't say that.
Yeah, so our bodies detect things on this broad spectrum of vibration. right? And we
well, there's a really broad spectrum. We detect tiny fractions of it, but it is
But I'm saying that
relatively broad.
I'm saying that, or I'm suggesting actually that we detect things on a very broad spectrum that we're not necessarily aware of.
Yeah, subtle senses too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Remove all radio waves and put yourself in a Faraday cage. Do you feel different? Maybe.
Yeah. I always have. I'm not getting there. I'm like, is it because I know that I'm in a Faraday cage, or does it actually feel different in here?
That's what I'm saying.
Like,
so,
remember the magnet experiment? I think that's relevant here. Where you have me close my eyes and you hand me a magnet and a piece of metal, and I'm like, this one feels weird.
yeah, exactly. He called it. I had this extremely powerful, brand new like neodymium magnet. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah, and it was a cylinder shape.
It was three of them stacked together in a cylinder, and I had an actual cylinder of steel. It was the same
weight and everything.
Weight, diameter. I mean, it was. I cut it to make it the same length and everything, and I would hold the two and try to see.
Right, but you're like, but I know.
Yeah, I know, but I think I can feel that this magnet feels totally different, but I don't know if it's that. So Russ shows up and he has no idea that I bought the magnet or whatever, and I'm like, hey, close your eyes. I'm gonna, put your hands out.
Yeah.
Hold your hands apart, far apart, and I put them in his hands. I'm like,
and what do you think about those things?
What do you think about them?
I'm like,
feel them.
I'm like, this one kind of feels weird. It's fucking, I can't describe it, but this one feels strange. And you're like, oh my God.
Fuck yeah. So all I'm saying is that we're a collection of sensors that we might have a sort of an average of like, this is the human perception of this,
Yeah.
But some people perceive things differently.
Right. There are outliers that perceive. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're also just like, everybody perceives things slightly different.
Right.
So we're not really sure. We can kind of give you an average or whatever, but it's possible that we are detecting things
All
on
the time. Yeah.
many different levels. So you see a ghost, and you, in looking at this ghost, are thinking you're seeing it with your eyes.
Yeah.
But it may be a lot of things that you're sensing the ghost with.
Yes. Okay. That's a great point.
Not just the eyes. So you take a camera, which is only the photoreceptors in the camera that are just picking up light.
Yeah.
And only in a very limited spectrum.
Right. This camera is a box of technology specifically designed to pick up what your eyes pick up and take a still shot.
And nothing more.
Right. And you're like, wow, look at that ghost over there. And you don't get anything because you weren't looking at it.
Or it just looks like some smoke or whatever. And people are like, that's just smoke, or that's fog, or that's just a glare in the lens.
That's not good evidence.
Right. So what you really need is to take a picture of it with a human.
Right. Look at that thing. Yeah, there's a great story that kind of illustrates this. Soraya, the guy that is the host of the show, of the podcast, Where Did the Road Go? He has told this story a couple of times. He says that him and two of his friends were up on these bluffs, but basically like hills, the tops of these hills that were overlooking a city. They were up there, and it was the evening time or whatever, and they had gone up. I can't remember why they were up there, but. So they're up there and it's grassy or whatever, and there's this big view in front of them where they can kind of see the whole city spread out in front of them. And there's a few trees up there with them, and Soraya says that like at some point, one of the trees off to the left or whatever just started shaking violently, like it was like really shaking. Like he said he thought at first that like there was a big deer like rubbing its horns on it, like what they'll scratch their horns on it. And it was just like shaking like crazy. He said it was so strong that they could feel it in the ground where they were standing. Like the tree roots were actually making the ground bounce. And so they're watching it, and he's like, what is it? And so he walked down and around to where he was could see the other side of the tree, and there was no deer. And he said at that point it stopped shaking, and he was like, So then he circles back around and gets back up to his friends, and he said when he got back up there, it started to shake again. And so they're both commenting on it. And then he said that his other friend, because there were three of them there, said, what the fuck are you guys talking about? And they're like, the fucking tree that's shaking. He's like, the tree isn't fucking moving. And so that made Soraya say like, what? Okay, so this is a guy who had been with him before when they experienced other paranormal shit. He wasn't blocking it out. He did, he saw stuff before. So what was happening here? Like his experience was he was being weirded out by the fact that like they're both talking about this thing that's happening. He's like, there is nothing going on over there, right? There's also the same thing happens in, like, okay, we've discussed briefly the visions of Fatima on the show, right? Where there were three children, and one of those children, the girl, saw the freaking Virgin Mary and spoke to what she recognized as an entity or whatever. The other two children, I'm not clear if they saw her or not, but then all these people, these tens of thousands of people that were there to witness the last one, none of them saw the Virgin, but they all saw weird light shows, and and when you read the reports, they're all different. I mean, they're kind of the same in some sense. Like, there's sort of similarities where you can see that there's similarities, but then it's also the details are different, right? So, like you were saying, it's like they're not seeing this with their eyes; it's interacting with something else.
Yeah, they're seeing it with their eyes, but with their eyes,
with
including all of the other senses that
they're seeing it with the part of their eyes that is pi. That's defining the radius.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking that it's like if you remove smell, then the taste of food is just
yeah,
totally different. It's like
meh,
right?
Yeah, this is really spicy.
But when you combine taste with smell, then you get the full thing.
Right.
So
like
it's
like harmonics being in a note makes it bright, makes it
yes,
more,
exactly. So you may not be able to separate the taste from the smell exactly.
Right.
You know, you can say, well, I smelled it before I ate it, and so I know what it smells like.
Yeah.
And then I ate it.
Try that with coffee.
But are you sure you know what it really tastes like if you've smelled it first?
That's what I was saying. Try that with coffee. You smell coffee, you're like, then you make it. It doesn't taste like that at all. Right.
But you have the combination of the smell and taste
right. So
together.
what you're supposed to do is inhale with your nose while you're drinking it.
But I'm just saying, if you remove the smell beforehand, and
no
then
one
you
would
go
ever
to
drink coffee.
Yeah, then you go to taste it, whatever it is, it's different.
Right.
You know. So the point is that you are seeing it with your eyes, but it's required that you have all these other senses.
Right.
Involved.
The camera does not see all that other shit. It just sees the eye part, which we can't discern. Probably because in some way we have become, well, as a culture, we have become unfamiliar with our subtle senses, whatever they are.
Yeah, you read stuff about just like the Native Americans and the things they sensed.
Yeah,
remember
the army and the hair tentacles. Remember that?
Yes.
I mean that's just like that is.
I was like, I'm growing my hair out.
That is scientific evidence that we have subtle sensors, at least some of which are involved with hair. You know, like
never cut his hair.
Yeah.
And then he cut his hair, and Samson lost all his powers.
That's right. Samson was a wuss after that. He just ground grain. He forgot his riddle.
And then he pushed down the pillars of Enoch and destroyed the whole culture.
No, don't push down the pillars of Enoch. Yeah, but I mean that whole thing with the army where they're like, okay, so you get it, badass Indian tracker. He wants to join the army. You test him out as a tracker. If you fucking shaved him bald like they do with every army guy, he's not really that great of a tracker.
Yeah,
you know, like they did the test where they sent the guy out on a solo or whatever, and then they're actually trying to sneak up on him in the middle of the night he doesn't know this is happening. And if the guy had been given the freaking army, cue ball cut or whatever, they were able to sneak up on him and surprise him while he was sleeping. But the native trackers that they let keep their long hair, they couldn't identify why, but like they're sitting there sleeping or whatever, and these dudes are like starting to creep up, and they wake up and they're kind of like, I think I'm gonna move, and they would just leave, and they didn't have a reason. They would just be like, something was wrong there,
That's wild.
And so the army was like, okay, don't cut their fucking hair, like let them keep, because like the trackers that like had their hair could not be snuck up on.
Yeah, Russ told me that story a while back.
I was like, oh my God, I'm growing my hair back out. I need my fucking brain tentacles.
I totally did.
And you could see how hair is a great sensor. It's all these tiny filaments that are just sticking out of your brain, right? I mean, what else is going on? It's your brain's going, feeling the, and like it picks up all these subtle vibrations, translates them into the follicles, into the nerve system that then go into your brain. Your brain's like, yeah, there's a dude sneak up on me right now. I think I'm gonna move. Yeah, but you translate it as like, I kind of feel uncomfortable. I want to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
It doesn't become part of your world picture. It just it's a sensation.
Right. Just like we had talked about how we actually can detect infrared light, but that sensor is our skin.
That's right. So basically, like, if you want to go ghost hunting, shave yourself bald. You won't be scared.
Yeah, because you won't know the ghost is sneaking up on you.
Well, I mean, you'll see the ghost and everything. You just won't have all the weird sensations that make you feel like terrified, right? Because that's how they get there, is through your hair.
Yeah, because when people see really, really scary things, their hair is standing up.
That's right. They're like, oh my God.
And there's some kind of static electricity going on there.
Yeah, the hair all stands up so that it can detect really carefully what's going on. It's just like your eyes getting wide when you see something, you know.
Yeah, when they turn the lights out, your pupils are like, you get all huge.
Right. Trying to pick up as much light as possible. So if you...
That's really interesting. All your hair stands up. So it can,
some of it turns white. Think about that. People who have a really traumatic, terrifying experience, they will have hair turn white.
White is all colors. Actually, a white substance is black.
It's reflecting everything.
Right.
So in the sense of your hair,
inside it's totally black.
It's dyed. It's like those white hairs are no longer sensors. They're like, they reflect all the information now instead of gathering some of it.
Oh shit! Oh my god!
It like, yeah. That's why I'm saying the terror comes to you
blew
through
it
your
out.
fucking hair. Yeah.
Those fuses are burned. Cut them off.
That's right.
Grow out the colored stuff.
That's right. Speculation, but yeah, interesting ideas. So
my interesting idea.
Very interesting ideas I've had. There is actually I have in my archive of weirdness somewhere. I've got this PDF that details a lot of the very interesting, like, paranormal / medium seance stuff that was happening at the turn of the century before we got into World War I and II and ruined all that shit. Dude, that shit is fucking wild. Like, I'll definitely, we need to dedicate a show to that stuff. It is crazy. Like, where they're manifesting materials. Like, one dude has a newspaper that, like, appeared during the seance that isn't real. It looks exactly like the London Times or whatever it is, but all the stories in it are from they're real London Times stories, but none of them were on this newspaper together, right? In other words, they were from different days in the sort of month surrounding it, and yet he has this newspaper of the London Times. It's like, it's got the date and everything, all these pictures, but it isn't a real one. But it is, it looks just like a real one. Huh. And it just manifested during the, like, there's just craziness, like, in the...
that reminds me, on the quantum superposition thing,
yeah,
right? Where you have these things that are in two states,
yes,
that shouldn't be able to be. Shit like that in my dreams all the time,
right? Yeah, and you were aware that something is and isn't.
Right. Both, so, like, the newspaper has all these articles that were from different days and times and everything. It's like, that kind of shit. Like, there's a guy, he's standing next to me, we're having a conversation.
But he's also somewhere else talking to somebody
else. But he leaves and goes and talks to somebody else, but he never actually leaves. I see the whole thing take place, but I'm not there, and I'm still here where I am.
It's quantum superposition plus entanglement. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like, why is that happening in the dream state, right? When you're asleep and you go into this whole world.
Because everyone's a quantum physicist when they're sleeping.
Only.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's like,
but it's like part of this could be where you can start that study.
Oh yeah,
like what? I'm trying to make some. I'm trying to make chunks of blocks and stuff out of this fog.
You can't connect lumps together in this shit.
No, but seriously, this is the only way I can deal with shit. Like, the dreams, the things in dreams that disobey all the physical laws apparently are obeying laws on the quantum level. Because it's not really made of stuff.
Right. Wow. Like, that just, okay, so you saying that just made me think of, because the way you said it, you're like, so you have these things in dreams that don't obey the physical laws because they're obeying the quantum ones. But then I immediately thought, but the quantum laws do translate to the real world. So, like, what physical laws? Like, in other words, what I'm saying is like, can we translate these quantum effects to the macro world just by wanting them to be there? Like, in other words, can you fly? Really, in the real world, like you can in your dreams, because that's like following some quantum thing. But we've already established that quantum effects...
No, I can only jump sideways for a really long time. Slowly going down.
Okay, but that would still be weird. Like, could you fall very slowly?
Yeah.
You're like, yeah.
Okay, so what are you saying?
What I'm saying is,
in other words, mind over matter is kind of what
yeah, it's something like that. Because there's all these stories, that they freaking sang the blocks into place.
Right.
These things floated or whatever. It was like their weights, mass, things did not seem to be a hindrance to ancient peoples, at least at certain times. Well, if it's really not mass, but information being like
translated between these.
Yes.
Maybe it's one world. Right, we keep talking about these two worlds. I think spiritual world or the consciousness, where that comes from is in this one. It's
a different realm or whatever you'd say.
Right, we talk about it like that, but if it's actually just one,
it's the weave, or the Celtics, right?
But we still talk about it. You and I,
right,
talk about it in terms of that. It's like there's a boundary line between them, and they sort of cross over in these weird ways.
Yeah,
but if we change the way we look at it, that just is the world.
Yeah, and the two of them together constitute everything. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I love the Celtic idea of the weave because you have the warp and the woof. The threads going like laterally is the material realm, and the threads going vertically is the spiritual one.
Oh, is that the way it works?
Yeah, so it's like the lateral.
I did not know that.
They freaking weave in and out with each other, up and down and over and across everything. They never become the other one, but they require each other to be a stable thing.
Right.
And they are affecting each other at every freaking intersection, and the whole thing together makes a freaking cloth. World, the realm, the universe.
Gonna study Celtic knots again.
Right, Celtic knots. Just draw one on the floor.
Russell put a picture of one of those.
Yeah, draw one on the floor, stand in the middle of it, and get lost.
And the other pictures Russell's gonna put in the show notes are gonna be weird.
Yeah, this one's gonna be hard to find pictures of. Maybe it'll just be pictures of us going, "What the fuck?" It'll just be WTF pictures.
I can't believe it, but I think something's going wrong with time because we're already at another break.
Wow. Well,
snake time.
Yeah, we know time is not real, so let's take a break anyway. We'll pretend that that's really the time. All right. Bye, snakes.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The final segment of the final hour of episode 13. Unlucky 13.
Snake teen. Black 13.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Unlucky 13 turns out to be a fog. It's a damn fog in here.
Stinking godforsaken mist.
Yeah.
What was the thing we were watching where he was explaining how 13 was actually a really because it's 12 plus 1. 13 is really,
that's right.
It's a really lucky number, actually. It's the Illuminati and the Bilderbergers and stuff trying to make 13 be unlucky, It's a giant conspiracy, folks. I'm telling you, they've been doing it for thousands of years. I would love to interview that guy on this show, man.
InfoWars.
Yeah, get old Alex Jones out here. Tell me about Pizzagate.
No.
Yeah, can't do politics, but he's got some great conspiracy stuff that's not politics, so. All right, your turn, go.
Okay.
Check, please.
Fog. So many things are going through my brain right now. I'm really trying to do this show, so keep a running dialogue happening while I'm trying to plug in this new idea to everything and think about it in a totally different way that will then become my way of thinking about it.
So if we take the elastic universe idea, and this is This is something we've been working on for a long time. That is where we try to view the universe as being affected by a series of waves in some undefined medium, like the ether is what we use. But basically, so you have the ether, it's everywhere, and that ether is resonant with wave patterns all throughout it at every level, from the macro like universe size structures down to the tiny micro quantum level. So
I think of the spectrum that the ether is elastic in, like it permeates infinite spectrum. So it doesn't matter how low the frequency of vibration, or how high the frequency of vibration.
I have speculated that it may be the neutrino stream, because like you can confirm, like a lot of regular physics has confirmed that like there are trillions of neutrinos streaming through everything all the time, and it's not really clear. You know, they're like, well, the stars make them, but it's just like, okay, do they really? Or they're flowing through the stars, but they're basically everywhere. Like right now, trillions and trillions and trillions of them are streaming through your body. Like it's just it can be viewed as a medium that is ubiquitous across the universe. And neutrinos are like okay, so like a neutron in an atom. A neutron is a big, heavy, massy particle that has no charge. A neutrino is like a photon, so like it has no mass, but it also is a neutrino. It has no charge, so it's like there's no way to interact with it at all. It's got no charge, it's got no mass. What is it doing? Does it even exist? It's like Particle Man. Yeah. You know, is he a dot or is he a speck? When he's underwater, does he get wet? Nobody knows. Particle Man. So neutrinos are everywhere. So I've wondered if the neutrinos are the clumps of the ether. Yeah. The lumps. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The idea that the universe actually consists of this ringing or vibrating medium in which there are other things that are not part of the medium that are thus affected, though, by all the vibrations going through it. So this is how you get planets and galaxy systems. And like, actually, if you look, I'll put a picture on this in the show notes. You can look at constructed images that astronomers have made of the universe structure. Okay, it's really interesting. Like they basically have looked out at the entire sky with radio telescopes, optical telescopes, infrared, ultraviolet, like all these different telescopes in full spectrum. And then you begin to see a picture of the whole universe from our perspective, obviously. But you can see that it's constructed, it's in filaments. Okay. Yeah. And it's in 3D, but it's easy to see it when you look at it. You're like, okay, that looks like some box of liquid that has a bunch of waves going through it that has dust in the liquid, right? So the dust in the liquid is being affected by all these waves that are kind of bouncing around, and you can see it, right? What's also really interesting is it looks a lot like neurons. That's pretty weird. Like if you look at a picture of a neuron and it's like this got a central area and then all these freaking things going out of it, and they attach to a bunch of other ones. And you look at the universe and you're like, yep, same thing. It probably talks to itself. So the problem that physicists have been having where they're like, is this thing a particle or is it a wave? I'm starting to look at that in terms of the same deal where like we have this part of this thing that is undefinable in our material universe. Right? This is why it kind of looks like both. Like
the pi relationship between the circumference.
Yes, like there's a part of this thing that actually constitutes the basic construction of our universe that there's a part of it that just extrudes off into some dimension that we can't define, just like pi or superposition or whatever, the quantum stuff. So like I'm looking at these, like why does it look like a particle sometimes? And other times it acts like a wave. Well, you can, like Feynman does, you can define that as saying like, well, when it looks like a particle, we're always hitting it with a hammer of light, right? But that isn't, and he says this, that's his extrapolation of what's happening. He knows that from the experiments he was telling, so we have to turn on this extremely bright light to look at these electrons as they're coming through, which is basically like hitting them with a hammer. But there are passive detections as well that have been recently done or whatever. But
and he's also talked about other ways of where it seems like when they do this same sort of hitting it with a hammer in this different way, it turns into a wave instead.
Right.
And they're like,
it turns
what?
into a wave.
Like, we were pretty sure it was a particle first.
Yeah, that's right. Started out as a particle.
Yeah.
And we hit it with the hammer.
We hit it with a hammer.
We hit it with a hammer. It turns into a wave. And you're like, did that just? Yeah. So I think that what's happening there is a quantum effect. Basically, is what I'm saying. In other words, it is because there is a weave to the woof of our universe, right? That we're seeing the effects of these other threads that are going in a direction that we can't see. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's what's interesting about neutrinos is that having very few properties of our universe that are definable, they may pass through both.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to explain this. I don't know if I can.
No.
But this is kind of, I think, in line with what you're saying. I focus a lot on nodes, like the nodes of waves. The nodes in a vibrating material. And the node is like the flex point, like you can imagine it, the hinge.
Yeah, it's the part that isn't moving.
The hinging point of the vibration. I think we talked about this before. Mm-hmm. But when you look at someone doing a cymatics experiment.
But who has looked at that?
Well, I'm just saying you can look it up, whatever.
Okay, yeah.
When you look at this, you see the way you can kind of look and see the vibration of a surface by putting, say, dust or some fine grain sand or salt or whatever on it.
Yeah.
All the salt is bounced away from the parts that are in motion towards the part that's actually flexing like a hinge.
Right. It's not moving itself. It is providing a fulcrum for everything else to move. But yeah.
Right. So we see the salt or the dust or whatever on the plate collect at these areas that are the fulcrum. Right. They're not in motion, so they're not bouncing the salt grains and.
Right. The bouncing parts are throwing the salt grains into the fulcrum areas.
Right. So if you were to kind of just look at that and imagine that we couldn't see the plate.
Yeah.
What it looks like is that the salt or the sand makes this design, right?
Yes.
And we're like, oh, okay, that's where the stuff is. And that's all the stuff. And so if you were to try to analyze the situation based on all of this stuff and the way the stuff is interacting with itself.
Yeah, it would be fairly mysterious.
Right. There's these big empty voids out there, but that's where all the action is. That's where
it's also like you're watching the if there's no plate and you're looking at all this stuff doing stuff and you're assuming that the stuff is the universe.
Right.
Then there's a whole bunch of unexplained motion that you are ascribing to the stuff.
Right.
But they can't find the source for it. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's kind of the way I was trying to wrap my brain around this idea of these particles, like the electron that we sort of notice as a cloud, but they're like, it's a dot, and it's moving around this nucleus of the atom. I tried to imagine that maybe there was that the atom is vibrating, right? We know it's jiggling, as Feynman says. It's
humming.
Yeah, it's moving back and forth. It's vibrating in some way, and each atom has its own specific sort of geometry in the way it vibrates.
Right,
how many sides?
It's actually made up of a bunch of smaller things that are also vibrating.
Right,
and so they all plug together and make a greater structure. Yeah.
Right. So, but still, I was even trying to remove the idea of a particle at all.
Yeah.
And think of it. What we see as the particle is actually a node. It's a nodal point, and the node is in motion because of the geometry of the vibration that's so complex that where the fulcrum is doesn't remain stationary relative to the atom.
Right, it'll start to move.
The fulcrum is moving all about and around the atom at the speed of light.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to think of all particles like this, or trying to work out something that how it would make sense that all of these things that we notice that are these little dots, right? Like we can pinpoint this dot and we know its position. That dot is actually a node. So really what we're actually looking for is where shit is not happening. where all this shit is happening is where we're not looking.
Right. Because we're distracted by what we think is real.
Exactly.
But if you look at 0 point energy, and I was thinking about this the other day, I was like, okay, so 0 point actually correlates to the elastic universe idea, because 0 point basically says that truly empty space, like where, you go out to somewhere intergalactic between galaxies where there's like nothing. As little of things, nothing. There's like nothing, not even shadows of, there's like as little of things as possible, like truly empty space. Because, if you're in a galaxy, chances are you've got particles from all kinds of stuff flying around you. They may be far apart to the point to where you can't, as a human being, tell, but a lot of our instruments can tell. Like, our solar system right now is passing through something called the local bubble, okay? And it's an area of space in which a supernova happened some time ago, and it like inflated this spherical area in space, and we're passing through it. And the local bubble contains a bunch of particles that are the remnants of that supernova that are individually each at several millions of degrees Fahrenheit.
I did not know that. We're passing through an old supernova?
Yeah. Well, it's the area that was cleared by the supernova. Like it explodes and like it blows this bubble up inside of stuff.
Let's drink some champagne.
some bubbly. So the individual particles, the leftover parts of these supernova are I can't remember, several million degrees Fahrenheit each one. But the space itself isn't that hot, okay? Because the particles are too far apart to constitute some like a gas or whatever that you might be passing through. They're so far apart. There's one or two particles per freaking square foot. I mean, or cubic foot. You can't tell, right? But if you clump them together to where they became a gas, it would be really fucking hot, right? It'd be millions of degrees. But so that's what I'm saying. So when you get out into intergalactic space where there isn't even a single particle per cubic mile or whatever, that's really empty. 0 point energy states that like for what makes space stable, the space-time thing stable, is that there are all these virtual they call them virtual. They're not really. It's the words they use is ridiculous. But basically, like two particles, they're called antipairs or whatever. They appear right next to each other in any given Planck, and then they fly towards each other and neutralize because one is the opposite of the other, and this is constantly happening. This makes the fabric of space-time, is these like virtual particle pairs appearing and disappearing every time. So like, this one's like 100% positive, this one's 100% negative. They touch each other and they become zero. But it's constantly happening, and this is what keeps space as space. So everything we do is like floating on top of this matrix of these continuously appearing and disappearing particle pairs. Okay, so that is the motion in the nothingness, the energy, because like the idea of 0 point energy, when they try to calculate, well, how much energy is represented in each one of these antipairs or whatever, and they found out that it's like in any single given antipair, the energy represented by those two particles before they annihilate each other is more than all the energy of all the stars that will ever burn in our entire universe ever.
Holy shit.
In every individual Planck, this is how much energy it takes to just hold space open, right? For it to exist. So that's so that's why, like, if you could tap 0 point energy as an energy source, because it's so tiny, you could just have a little tiny object like this, and the size of a watch, and if you tap 0 point, you would have infinite energy at your disposal. But the fact that like elastic universe speculates that the empty places in space are the ones that have the most energy, this is true. Like according to 0 point, like correlates with that, and it is actually. You can see these antipairs appearing and disappearing and annihilating as a tiny piece of a vibration, of a greater vibration on this, that would be, I think it would be, I'm just...
Maybe they're like a higher harmonic or something of the greater...
Well, I was guessing that...
Fundamental.
I was guessing that maybe the ether, if it is whatever it is, if it's the neutrino stream or whatever, is picking up vibrations from this action that's taking place all the time.
Or the elasticity of the ether is what they're actually looking at. They're looking at the like these things that they say, appear and then
annihilate. Yeah.
Annihilate is sort of the ether's elasticity. So it's stretching and it's flexing out and then coming back together. So that's part of it.
That makes sense too. Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking of it like, is the ether this thing that's happening, or is the ether a medium that is it within space that is doing all this stuff, and that's what's vibrating?
Right, and I think that too. The way I kind of would look at it was this thing that they notice is some effect of that. I'm just comparing it to the elasticity of the ether, not saying that is it really, or
no, that makes sense.
Something that represents it.
Yeah, that makes sense too. Either way, it doesn't matter. Like I was just thinking, like, but what's fascinating, and like you can see this if you look. Okay, if you go on Google Earth and and I'll put pictures of this if I can find them. You go on Google Earth and you try to look at pictures that they've taken of the ocean. Just find any wide area of the Pacific, and like turn off the water effects, because like Google Earth has these like wave effect if you're looking at the ocean. That's a digital, where they move. Turn that off. So where you're just looking at satellite pictures of water. Okay, and get yourself a good high resolution image of that, but be backed way out so that you can see, and you'll see a wave pattern in the Pacific, in this ocean. Now try to figure out which direction are those waves going.
Right.
And you begin to realize that what you're looking at looks more like the pattern of waves that appear on a cup of water on a table that's vibrating because some bass note is going on nearby.
Right. That
it's making all these little points and peaks, and they are moving in a very complex way, but they aren't like rolling to the south or whatever.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time doing this, like just basically zooming around over the Pacific, looking at nothing but waves in the ocean. And you can see some patterns that are overlying this smaller peak pattern. And they're always at some weird angle. Like, so you'll see this peak pattern or whatever, and you can kind of see that as a grid. It's not really, but it sort of defines itself as a grid. And then you'll see this larger shadowy pattern of what does look like waves that are rolling in some direction. And they're at like some weird, like 15.56 degrees at, or whatever to the grid pattern. And they're like rolling in one direction or another, and they're bigger. And you can see this repeated in several ways. And I don't know what any of that means, but basically what I'm trying to describe here is like, this is a system we can look at that is a complex, it's a complex medium that is interacting with a huge number of variables that are generating vibrations on its surface and within it.
Right.
And if you back out, you begin to see that this causes all kinds of interesting things to happen. And then if you're standing on the shoreline, these waves are just rolling at you, right?
Right.
So at the edges of it, it becomes a defined thing. But if you're looking in the middle, you can't find, where's the source of those waves that roll at you when you're standing in Hawaii, or if you're standing on the Pacific? How come when you're in Hawaii, they're coming at you, and if you're on the California coast, they're also coming at you?
Right. We actually, we did this experiment with a drum head, and we took a drum.
I'll put that in the
And we put a speaker underneath it. We didn't actually video this one though. The one where I put the water on top.
Oh yeah.
And we're resonating it.
Nope.
And you shine a light at it at an angle so you can get the water to shine just so. And I would use a tone generator and change the frequencies, and it would create these wave patterns, these standing wave patterns on the water that looked. And then there would be these like transverse waves going across it.
Some oblique angle or whatever.
Right. And if you find a good frequency that makes it really stand up, that one will have a definite looking pattern, and the big, like what we called rogue waves were going across it. They would repeat in the same.
Yeah. And there would be sets of them.
Right.
Like, it would be, like 5 would go across, and then and then 5 more would go across. Yeah.
And then one would go at a different angle, a different way. And then and they would keep repeating that. And then if you change the tone to a different resonance and got it to make a different pattern, then there would be a different set of these rogue waves that would go at different angles.
Right. And so if you think of Schumann resonance, which is the Earth is basically pulsing or vibrating at this Schumann resonance, it's 7.64, whatever. It varies between 12 and 7 ish.
Yeah.
12 and 7. So that could easily be part of what's creating the ocean waves. But then there's a bunch of other stuff too. Like the moon is spinning around us, and it's pulling everything in certain directions. And like I used to say that like the sound of the waves hitting the beach was the sound of the moon orbiting the Earth. It's kind of in there, but it's not totally correct. It's also the sound of the Earth going. There's a bunch of stuff in there. But like, think of the universe like this. Think of the universe as an ocean, this medium, the ether. Okay. And when we're looking at waves on the ocean, we are looking at a 2D surface. We're just, I mean, those waves are down in it too, but we think of it in terms of two-dimensional.
Right. We see the transverse waves on the top.
Right. But there's wave action.
They're very different than the turbulence going on down underneath.
Right. The compression and rarefaction.
But you could analyze them, and it's possible that you could analyze the waves if you had a computer that was badass enough to determine what was going on down underneath.
You need a quantum computer.
Yeah.
One that can like both understand how to do this and not at the same time. So if you think of that happening in the universe, you begin to see that like it's possible that gravity is actually a function of these waves moving around in this medium, pushing things around.
Right.
So
and where we're standing, the gravity keeps coming at us in big waves.
Right.
But if you're on the moon, they're coming at you too.
Right. So if you're, that's right. Why is gravity pushing me onto the moon and also pushing those people onto the Earth? Because it's waves. And we did this with the experiment Kyle was talking about, like where we had the liquid and it was being vibrated by certain frequencies, and then were you putting sand in there? What was it?
It was
glitter.
It wasn't glitter. It was, I don't know what the material was. I got it from Archer's grandfather. It was just this bottle of this weird red, sandy, shiny stuff.
Okay.
I have no idea what it was.
Well, we should identify that, but we can say what the experiment was.
I don't have it anymore.
Magic fucking dust.
Yeah, it was
like,
this
that's
magic
why it
red
works.
dust.
We put fairy dust in there and it worked.
It kind of looked like glitter, but it was more like granules, like sand.
Yeah. So when we put random dust into the water that was being vibrated by these tones, and the dust immediately formed systems of things.
Yeah.
Like it couldn't be the waves like the water was doing. In other words, the water is a medium, the sand is not, right? So unlike other cymatic experiments where you have an iron plate or a metal plate and you've got salt or sand or whatever on top of that, and the plate is vibrating and just pushing the grains of sand around and pushing them into patterns. In this case, we had a three-dimensional medium that was being vibrated into having a series of complex wave patterns moving through it. And then we put clumps of stuff into that to see what would happen. And the clumps of stuff formed systems that looked nothing like the wave patterns,
right?
But were being defined by them, obviously. So like you would get a big clump, like a central sort of circular clump, and
it would continue to collect more and more grains of sand.
Meanwhile, a smaller clump that had started over here would then begin to be affected by the fact that this big clump in the middle is now causing secondary waves going off, and then it would go into orbit around it. So we started to see little systems like this, so you could see how we could have a central star that's the big clump, right? And then you have all these planets that are going in orbit around it, and that can be completely caused by the action of a series of wave patterns passing through the medium of the ether in everything. This is what would be like in this idea. This is what defines the structure of galaxies, usually being whirlpools of some central clump with a whole bunch of stuff traveling around it.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is if you go and look at like Hubble's images of galaxies that are incredibly far away, so that also, because in space also equals time. So if we're looking at a galaxy that's 4 billion light years away, that's also 4 billion years in the past. The light that we're looking at is 4 billion years ago. So, well, theoretically anyway. So when we're looking at the most distant objects they can see with the telescopes we have now, we're also looking at the oldest things we could see, the youngest period of the universe, right? So they can look way back into the time of the universe and see galaxies that were forming in the very beginning, and they didn't have the beautiful freaking spiral structure that a lot of galaxies have now. Like the closer galaxies get to us, the more sort of structured they get, and that's because they have evolved in time in these series. I'm saying in these series of waves, right? So like just like we saw with when you first throw the sand in there, it has to sort of gather itself.
Right.
And sort of it will begin to form these systems that become more and more complex.
At first, there were like a bunch of little pieces of the sand and dust stuff moving in patterns that looked very similar to the pattern of the vibration.
Right.
And then at a certain point, one of these rogue waves of the pattern of the vibration would go over, and it would kind of disturb the pattern of the sand that was trying to follow that pattern, and they would clump together. And once enough of them clumped together, they would not separate after that because they sort of attenuated the homogeneous pattern of the water, right? And they would disturb.
They form this mound of sand that's sticking up out of the water.
It starts piling itself up higher and higher out of the water, and there would be these sort of concentric rings that would form around it
which are like secondary waves.
Right.
Yeah.
These strings of sand that would go in these rings around it, and then those would start to clump into smaller clumps.
Right. So you basically get a freaking solar system.
We watched pretty much a solar system form, and then the sun gobbled them all up.
Yeah, it's like how.
It was pretty badass.
But what was interesting about that experiment, and then again, when you look at the way that actual observed data of space correlates with this, that in the very early universe, the oldest objects, the most distant ones we can see, they didn't have. They're like the galaxies were just like little kind of like smears or lumps of stuff. They didn't have a defined form. But as the galaxies we're looking at get closer to us, and therefore
the light is later in time,
right, and therefore closer to us in time as well, we begin to see structure appear. So you can kind of see the progression. Okay, the most distant things are like the earliest galaxies. They're little smudges. They just don't have a shape at all. They're just like little random.
That's really cool. I didn't know
Rorschach
that.
blots. And then as you get closer, they begin to have these disc shapes, and then the spiral arms begin to form, and like you can see it happening, and they become more and more complex until you're like looking at Andromeda right next to us, and it's just like freaking beautiful and amazing. So like that also correlated with that. And another thing I think about with this in terms of like, can we say that gravity is a push instead of a pull? Because that's really, I would say that probably the main thing that people would focus on if we try to if we tried to somehow present this theory to the wider world, the thing that everyone would focus on is the fact that we're saying gravity is a push, not a pull.
Right.
They'd be like, "Oh my god, that's so dumb." But
I actually watched this video. I can't remember who it is. This physicist, modern day physicist, who I think he's sort of
Michio Kaku,
maybe that's him. Yeah.
the Asian guy. He's
Yeah.
cool as hell. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was saying that. He's
Yeah.
like, gravity's actually pushing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, but I think I've heard him talk about that before. But he was still thinking of it in terms of being defined by the mass of the body that you're on. Though.
Right.
Yeah. I'm like, you're almost right, bro. Almost right. A few more years. So to line this out real quickly though, gravity in the elastic universe theory, gravity is a push, not a pull, and the push is coming from these patterns of waves that are moving through the ether. Okay.
Yes.
So the reason why Earth is here is because it's clumped together, avoiding these big wave patterns that are outside.
Right.
Not so anywhere there's huge wave patterns, there's not stuff, right?
Right.
Just like on the cymatics plate, everything is like clumping together in these spots, not because they're pulling themselves together because of their inherent gravity within them, but because there's places outside that are highly energetic that they don't want to be in, that they're getting thrown off of.
Right.
Right.
But you could continue this idea down to small things. Like we can,
Yes.
a ball of steel or a ball of lead might seem to be attracted to another large ball of lead.
Right.
But it's not necessarily still that gravity is coming from within, but that the fact that those things are held together by the way they're held together, they've already been pushed together by this force in a star at some point.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so they're crystallized with this sort of this resonance. Okay. They have the pattern inherent in them. So they already, like, I don't know how to describe this. The way I'm
You
trying
mean
to think about it.
the material itself is like all the way down to like the subatomic level has been formed by the fact that these waves are moving through the
Yes.
ether.
So they still
Yeah.
interact in the same manner.
Yes, like so that's what I was going to get to. Like you say gravity is a push, not a pull, but that changes nothing in the way that things interact with each other.
Right.
And it doesn't even change the math of things because you still have to look at the centers of mass and all this kind of stuff. It's just that like you can it's interesting. You can flip the force around and say it's pushing from the outside instead of pulling from the inside, and nothing changes
Except that
except our ideas of where the force is coming from.
right. And then some things seem to make more sense.
Yeah,
like
they
dark
become a lot
matter.
easier to explain. And I was just gonna say, like, I don't know if we've ever touched on inertia with this idea, but like when you were describing the ball of lead or the ball of steel or whatever, I started to think like, wait, how come I can pick that ball up and move it around? Because I'm not part of the wave. Whatever I'm doing right there is not part of the wave pattern. I'm like, but that's why it has inertia. I'm having to push it through the wave patterns.
Right.
Wow.
Because it's already got that. Yes, that's exactly right. Or I think it's brilliant.
It's exactly right.
It's exactly right. It's brilliant. It's probably
so
wrong
this is
on
why
all
we
kinds
like
of
the
levels.
elastic universe theory, because this happens all the time where you're looking at a problem where it's been a big mystery for a long time, and you say, well, if I look at it through the lens of elastic universe, a lot of things, but you're like, oh, well, that's easy to explain with that. Well, that's done. And you like, it's so many things have been like that. I'll ask Kyle, I'll be like, so what about this? And Kyle's like, oh yeah, because blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, that answers that question. Mystery over.
Explain the dark matter scenario.
Oh, okay.
In terms of elastic universe.
So dark matter is a placeholder. The words, the concept is a placeholder for a problem that where astronomers look out into space and we see a bunch of objects, stars, galaxies, or whatever, and they're in systems with each other. So like there'll be a galaxy cluster, right? So a bunch of galaxies are in this sort of cluster, and they're all orbiting each other. But they started to realize that like if you use the laws of gravitation, Newtonian laws, or even like using like correcting those with the Einsteinian like relativity rules or whatever, and you try to start calculating. Okay, so you see this galaxy, and based on the light and everything, you can kind of calculate its mass and the other ones it's in a system with, and then you get their velocities and how they're moving or whatever, and you start to say, okay, so this one's moving this fast, and what you want to try to identify the forces and the strengths of them in this system, and you start to realize that like the amount of gravity necessary to hold this galaxy cluster together as they're all whirling around each other is far larger than the galaxies themselves actually can generate, okay? There's not enough mass in all those galaxies to make that galaxy, it should fly apart, okay? So since modern day physicists associate gravity with mass, they assumed there must be a bunch of mass in that cluster system that we can't see that's generating this extra gravity that is holding the system together. So this is dark matter. The dark matter is the matter that we can't see that is generating the gravity that must be there for the system to work. There have been countless ongoing experiments to locate or in some way identify or even like, see something that bounced off of something that like went past something that went through something that might have touched dark matter at one point, right? No one has been successful at all in finding any kind of, the only thing that they can say that says dark matter is there is the fact that you need more gravity to hold these systems together. Well, in the elastic universe, that problem goes away because the gravity is coming from the outside. It is the system of waves through the ether, and you don't need mass because mass and gravity don't correlate in this system.
Right. So one way of illustrating that would be, again, taking the cymatics experiment, and you guys should look this up if you're unfamiliar with it. But say you have this plate that's resonating that you put the sand on.
It's resonating because somebody's playing a tone, like
right, right.
Yeah.
You put the sand on it, and the sand all collects at the nodal points, right? Like we had just discussed.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't put any sand on it,
it's still resonating.
It's still resonating, and those nodal points are still there. And if you put sand on half of it, only on this side, one side, the sand will all collect to the nodes on that side, and then you could look at that and say, okay, yeah,
you can extrapolate.
Extrapolate based on the sand over here that
the pattern, the rest of the pattern will look like this. Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like the waves that are inherent in the ether create the force that drives matter to collect at a position, at a place.
Right.
But if there's no matter there or on that side of the apex of the wave, the forces are still there. So the matter might have been on the wrong side of the apex of this vibration, and it's pushed or forced to a different node.
Right.
So there are nodes all over the place that have no matter in them.
Right.
But if you were to put a big dust cloud of freaking nebula around this thing, it would eventually collect at this node.
Right, which we would call star generation. Like the nebula would begin to create stars and planets and systems and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So the other thing is you have dark matter and then you have the dark force. Okay, so this one is like when they started to look at macro systems, like really massive, just below the entire universe, like just below the size of the entire universe size systems, like macro systems where you're looking at filaments of material that constitute like billions of galaxies. And okay, so you're looking at huge structures. They started to realize that all of those things, and there's a really fascinating graphic of this they made where you see this like mesh, this purple and blue mesh work on top of black. And it's like, it looks like you're looking at a billion spider webs all sort of stacked on top of each other. But you start to realize as you're looking at it that they're all in motion. But what's happening is the open spaces in between them are just kind of slightly getting bigger everywhere. Okay. It's a very strange looking thing. It isn't necessarily expanding, and the things are all in motion, but what's happening is the little open spots are just getting bigger. And that is then being correlated to all these mesh things. It's almost impossible to describe, but I'll put a link to the video in there. That's happening to the universe. There is nothing that can explain this. Because it's not just, they're not just moving apart, but it's accelerating. The speed at which these open spaces are getting larger accelerates over time. That implies a constant force pushing them all the time, right? You can't accelerate with it. You can have a velocity, if you and I started moving apart at 70 miles an hour and then there was no additional force applied, we would continue to move apart that fast. But if we continue to accelerate, you would have to assume that something is putting the gas on, right? Right. So that's happening everywhere in the universe, at these macro structures. You only see the dark force taking place on the largest sizes in the universe. You just see that it's pushing everything apart and it's accelerating that pushing apart. Whereas dark matter is holding everything together in smaller structures, like still huge, galactic cluster structures, but much smaller than this dark force. So what's fascinating to me is with dark force and dark matter, or dark energy and dark matter combined, in terms of matter and energy, those now constitute about 86 to 92% of all the matter and energy in the entire universe.
Yeah.
Okay, so the stuff we can see is like 2 to 3%, maybe 8%. And they have like made these placeholders that are required by what's being observed.
If the source of all of this energy is matter.
Right. But if you change that one thing and say, well, maybe, and see, you can't even explain the dark force because it's pushing things apart. Like gravity doesn't do that. Gravity doesn't have an antipode. There's no anti-gravity that we know of.
Right.
Gravity has no polarity.
Right. But in an elastic universe, it
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because it's like when you throw a pebble into a pond.
Yeah.
The waves, they spread out and they spread out.
Right. So and then they hit the sides and they start bouncing and it becomes complex. Right. And it'll do all kinds of interesting things in there. And then you're like, what? But the initial impetus was just outwards in all directions from a point. But now it's going everywhere. Right. And it's become very complex and subtle. So they're hoping to find dark matter because dark matter contains all this gravity that they need to say, here's how the universe is working in our paradigm. They've not been able to locate it. They also need to find dark energy, but they don't even know where to start with that because there isn't anything that pushes stuff apart. So you have like one thing that is like, despite all of the best attempts by all of the best laboratories for like 100 years, no one has been able to find it. And then another thing that nobody even knows how to start looking for because there's nothing that does that accelerates things apart in the way that gravity accelerates things together, right? Elastic universe doesn't have these problems because it doesn't need the force is inherent in the patterns of waves, and that's all there is to it. Like you can see that in the largest structures, yes, of course, everything would sort of begin to drift apart because that's what that does happen in these wave patterns. But whereas in the smaller structures, things tend to clump together, right?
Right.
It's really easy to explain, which is like what makes the entire concept attractive as a I don't know, like I was saying earlier, everyone knows the standard model, right? We know that. Like, here's another way. We're just talking about this, and here's another way, and it solves all these problems that exist in the standard model to the point to where they aren't even problems in this model.
Yeah.
That's what's fascinating about it to me. You're just like, this isn't even when you ask the same question that in the standard model, you're like, I have no idea how to answer this. It's a great mystery. In this model, as soon as you ask the question, you realize that it's self-evident and it isn't a mystery at all. And no one would be bugged by it because you're just like, well, of course it works like this.
And the other strange thing that I find about it is that it's simply a way to sort of imagine it. It doesn't change the math. It doesn't change the relationships of all. It doesn't change anything.
We've actually been struggling to find something that would be different so we could say, here's how to falsify this.
Right. But at the same time, it's like what Feynman was saying about trying to paint a picture that would help you to understand the way this shit happens on the quantum level, and he's trying to paint this picture, and it's like I can't think of anything. This is like a picture that helps to understand all kinds of stuff, because after thinking about it this way, and like we're comparing it to the standard model and the things that we know based on the math and based on the experiment that take place, we modify our sort of theoretical imaginings of it, and and it's like, oh, okay. And then once we get some new piece of information that is something that's been tested, that's proven as this is the way this thing works, and you try to figure out how that works with the cymatics or with the elastic universe idea, it often clears everything up. It's like it becomes more clear rather than causing a problem that you have to.
Right. The new data plugs into very easily, and like is not mysterious or whatever. Even if it may have been mysterious in the standard model, it plugs into the elastic universe theory extremely easily, and moreover clears up a bunch of other stuff around that were muddy about the theory that we didn't really understand. You're like, oh, well, all this stuff works this way too. Yeah. It's really fascinating. And it's a handy way to look at stuff. And I'm wondering, I've been thinking about trying to get a hold of the people at the Thunderbolts project, the electric universe guys, because I think that like electric and elastic universe together may have a completely different paradigm of the way the universe works. That is like that, because the Thunderbolt, the electric universe does the same thing in terms of like energy interactions, and I'm like they may have the other side of this.
Yeah.
So the fact that you have this like sort of ubiquitous material, the ether, that is carrying waves around, and waves are defined by math, and yet, so if you look at a sine wave, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in that sine wave that you can't really correlate directly to material stuff, because it's perfect curves and that doesn't happen. And, matter is made of clumps of things, and right. So again, I'm just pointing out that the same sort of, that you still have lines going off into the spirit realm from all this stuff. The fact that it's waves and it's patterns of waves fits with all of that. I just think it's fascinating, like really, you can think of a wave. The crest of a wave is could be part of a circle. Yeah. It has the same, it has the amplitude and everything is part of the radius, whatever. So like I see these mathematical fundamentals that don't precisely correlate, and yet still somehow govern everything that's happening. Yeah. And that's part of this theory too. Whereas like the standard model theory of gravity doesn't do that.
There is no theory of gravity.
Right. That's right. There's no theory of gravity.
And we're almost 30 minutes over.
What?
But it was totally worth it.
No, you got to delete it. Got to delete it right now.
No. Yeah, we're giving
there's just one segment of this show that just like went off into the other universe.
Yeah.
It's not like 30 minutes over. It's segment 5.
Yeah. You're just saying time doesn't really exist anyway, so
it doesn't.
So we can just decide that it's time.
Right. I mean, we've said let's do 4 segments, 30 minutes each to have a 2-hour show, but sometimes maybe we want to do like a 12-hour show. Not this time, but just say this time we're going to do a 2.5-hour show. Yeah. So thank you guys very much for listening. Thanks to Laura for the intros. Thanks to Smith Sonic Studios for helping us out with mics and stuff. AWACS Productions, Aethrim Studios. You guys can send us an email at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. You can go to the blog and comment there at brothersoftheserpent.blogspot.com. Check the notes in the show for pictures and probably some weird stuff for this one. On the pictures and maybe some video links, and I don't know. I'll find stuff to put in there.
High one, everybody.
High one.
Snake vibes.
Snake vibes. Shoulder rivers.
Bowling pin hats.
Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.